At the end of the 18th century, William Morris, a former naval navigator, decided on an adventure bordering on madness, a voyage to Antarctica. This was terra incognita, an uncharted, icy wasteland from which no explorer had ever returned alive. But what he discovered there was more than just a new continent. It was the key to unlocking the forgotten past of all humanity. William would encounter advanced civilizations, uncover ancient mysteries, and learn of the powerful forces that shaped our reality before we even suspected their existence. To understand the full depth of his incredible story, we must travel back to its very origins. During the Revolutionary War, William served in the Continental Navy. For duty's sake, he abandoned his wife Lucy and the peaceful life they had dreamed of building together. But war, as it always does, mercilessly crushed their dreams, leaving behind only the bitterness of a long separation. Imagine one night after the British surrender at Saratoga. His ship, under the light of a full moon, was heading for Charleston, the silent Atlantic stretching to the horizon. To dispel the anxiety born of war, the crew gathered in the cabin, swapping stories over glasses of whiskey. Soon the conversation turned to Captain James Cook and his inexplicable obsession, crossing the Antarctic-Arctic Circle. What motivated him? That mystery remains unsolved. At first, William didn't attach much importance to this, but everything changed when his own captain, Butler, spoke. His voice was calm, yet laced with steely determination. "Perhaps there's a passage somewhere beyond the Arctic Circle," he said, "a gateway to the lands beyond." There was no hint of humor in his tone. A deafening silence fell over the cabin. Everyone waited for the denouement, but none came. Butler merely added that he had sources high up who confirmed that expeditions were being secretly financed with one goal: to break through the harsh southern climate and reach the lands beyond the ice. What lurked beyond that icy wall? He swore he'd personally seen a map with the coordinates of such a passage. The idea seemed fantastic, but it clung to William's mind like a splinter, haunting his restless dreams. Years passed. The war ended, and many warships were either decommissioned or sold at auction. William, by then quite wealthy, made a decision that shocked his friends. He decided to buy one of these ships. They laughed at him, but the memory of Butler's story haunted him, fueling an insatiable thirst for exploration. Lucy had her doubts, but William's resolve was unwavering. By November, he had assembled a crew, though most of the sailors, upon hearing the purpose of the voyage, understandably declined the offer. Only 2 of his old friends, who had been with him that fateful night, were enthusiastic about the idea. But convincing Butler was a task of an entirely different order. For weeks, William had been racking his brains over how to approach the old captain. He knew perfectly well that without Butler's experience and his contact information, the whole undertaking was doomed. When he finally plucked up the courage to ask, Butler showed keen interest but still declined. However, on October 11th, without warning, Butler himself appeared on William's doorstep. He held a stack of maps William had never seen before. Beside him stood a man named Turnbull, and they both looked as if they had arrived from another world. "I'll join you," Butler said, "but be warned, this may be a one-way trip." William nodded silently. In that moment, he realized this was no longer a vague dream. This was a professional mission, demanding everything he had. The adventure was beginning. The departure date was set for November 14th. William and his crew worked at breakneck speed, torn between thrilling anticipation and bone-chilling trepidation. Every detail was meticulously planned, and Butler's mysterious companion, Turnbull, had joined the expedition. However, as the cherished day approached, the ominous atmosphere grew thicker. They spoke of the adventures to come, but none of them could have imagined that their journey would surpass their wildest fantasies. 2 days before departure, William was awakened by a sharp knock on the door. Turnbull stood there, accompanied by a stranger dressed all in black, with a stern face and a strange, jarring accent. "It's urgent," he said. After some hesitation, William let them in. Turnbull opened his old battered briefcase and pulled out an ancient manuscript, its fragile yellowed pages covered in an unfamiliar script. In a quiet, solemn voice, he began to read. As requested, I subscribe to this with special conditions. By the will of our masters, let the gates of knowledge remain closed to those who reject our path. William felt a chill run down his spine. This sounds like some kind of initiation ritual, he muttered, more to himself. Exactly, Turnbull replied. Those who fail the initiation are considered outcasts. We are outcasts. Confused, William asked, What does all this mean? What does this have to do with our journey? Turnbull's face darkened. The manuscript belongs to the Guardians, the sun gods as they are called. We must return there to learn more about them and their laws. They call themselves Guardians. Thanks to Butler, they know of our expedition and are extremely displeased. This decree states that no one is to leave these lands without their permission. An oppressive silence fell over the room. William, prepared for any storms and battles, now faced an invisible but all-powerful enemy. Who are these Guardians? He demanded. But before Turnbull could say anything, the stranger spoke. They are displeased with your journey, he said, with a mysterious grin. That is all you need to know. Turnbull began to persuade him to call off the expedition, warning, you should not risk your life. William, infuriated by their secrecy, ordered them to leave. But even when they left, the heavy feeling did not leave him. When William tried to contact Butler to clarify this strange visit, he encountered a wall of silence. And when his crew gathered to discuss what had happened, they were horrified to learn that Butler had disappeared without a trace for several days. The situation became increasingly clouded. Without Butler, their plan, which had seemed so brilliant, now looked like sheer suicide. Walter, one of the sailors, recalled hearing some vague rumors about the Guardians, but could provide nothing concrete. The crew reluctantly postponed sailing. Weeks passed, with no sign of Butler, and their grand plans crumbled before their eyes. Finally, November 14th arrived, and their last hope was almost extinguished. But early in the morning, there was another knock on William's door. To his astonishment, Butler stood there, arms full of supplies. His face was as inscrutable as stone. Time to go, mate, he said, as if nothing had happened. Stunned, William peppered him with questions, telling him about Turnbull's visit and his dire warnings. Butler's expression turned icy. It was necessary, he replied. I had to disappear to get it. He unrolled a huge map and spread it on the living room table. William stood frozen, stunned. The map depicted vast, unknown lands, the scale of which dwarfed anything he had ever seen. You know about the Keepers? He asked. Butler nodded grimly. The story we know is only a fraction of the truth, he said. These ancient pyramid builders, the so-called Keepers, have no intention of allowing us to cross the South Pole. He explained that Turnbull had betrayed them by reporting their expedition to the Keepers. If we don't set sail today, we may never get another chance, Butler warned. William hastily assembled his crew. Assembling at the port, they set sail from Charleston, heading south into the silent, uncharted expanses. Each of them understood that their lives and the truth they pursued would never be the same. The plan seemed simple. Reach the icy waters of Antarctica in 140 days, stopping to replenish supplies. However, the atmosphere on board was charged to the brim. Butler's mysterious disappearance and his talk of another ancient race raised troubling questions about the power they were challenging. The first days of the voyage passed peacefully. The weather was favorable, and supplies were plentiful, bolstering the crew's morale. They crossed the equator. The tropical heat was so oppressive that it was difficult to even imagine the icy lands that lay ahead. At Butler's insistence, they made an additional stop and loaded even more provisions on board. He was certain the voyage would last longer than planned. As they approached the mysterious south, the air grew heavier. One clear night, With only the lapping of the waves to be heard, William stood on deck, pondering the mysteries that lay ahead and the familiar world he had left behind. Was it worth risking everything for an encounter with an unknown force lurking at the edge of the world? His thoughts were interrupted by Butler, emerging from the shadows. "Freezing, my friend?" he said with an enigmatic smile. "You have no idea what awaits you." "You were there?" William asked urgently. "I was," Butler replied shortly, his gaze fixed on the southern horizon. "I saw it with my own eyes." William wanted to pepper him with questions, but Butler raised his hand. "In time, you will see it too," he said, "and you will not believe what lies beyond these waters." The days turned to weeks, and when they reached the southern seas, the world around them began to change. The water turned dark, almost black, the waves rose ever higher, and giant icebergs loomed above them like silent guardians. A fierce storm battered their ship, but Butler's icy calm gave the crew confidence, even when the roar of the wind seemed to undermine their very resolve. They sailed alongside a wall of ice nearly 90 meters high. Its jagged peaks cast an ominous red and yellow shimmer in the rays of the low polar sun, as if an invisible fire blazed behind it. The crew named their ship Secret, the only fitting name for this reckless voyage into the heart of mystery. Imagine a world in which humanity has been robbed of something priceless, its very essence, and now, in this eternal twilight, it struggles to find its way back to the light. The power of the invaders, these so-called colonizers, seems absolute. They slowly, methodically, and inexorably extinguish the very fire that burns within the soul of every human being. And though people still breathe and walk the earth, their immense inner potential, their true power, slowly melts away, like a glacier under a merciless sun. The true catastrophe lies not in physical annihilation, not in the death of bodies. The most terrible thing is the coming day when the last human being forgets the incredible power that slumbers within them. And it is for this lost legacy, for this last spark, that they must fight to remake the very fabric of their world, Istusindesh. At the apex of this tyrannical pyramid stand three major conquering races, the Guardians, the Anunnaki, and the Costadians. Their iron grip tightens not only around the neck of humanity, but also over the fates of countless other civilizations. Their primary weapons are fear, a web of lies, and the subtlest manipulations they employ to maintain their dominance. But even their seemingly eternal reign will not last forever. In the darkest corners of conquered worlds, embers of resistance still smolder, fanned in the hearts of those who believe in freedom. And they have hope. History remembers the civilizations that managed to throw off these shackles, and their legends serve as a beacon for all who are willing to fight back. Sadat's house. Some of these free races are even willing to lend a helping hand so that humanity can regain its power and escape captivity. And at the very heart of this cosmic drama lies the greatest mystery of the Skylands. These hidden, almost mythical worlds have remained untouched by the invaders, despite their incredible technology and military might. The Skylands are the cradle, holding the very source of life, something so unique to humanity that the colonizers are unable to subjugate or destroy it. They may reshape the outer world, but they will never comprehend the power that lies deep within. Sulo Dexiu. Let us fast forward to the story of one man. William Morris was never one to meekly accept imposed boundaries. He was always driven forward by an insatiable curiosity. Born in the so-called known lands, he grew up in the shadow of colossal ice walls and mysterious barriers that seemed to imprison humanity, not only physically, but also mentally. But no walls could contain his indomitable desire for knowledge and freedom. The barriers that stood in William's way were not created by nature. They were erected by those who craved power and control. Oksum Nudu. Where others saw only an insurmountable dead end, William Morris saw challenge and opportunity. Undeterred by fear or doubt, he accomplished the impossible. He overcame those icy bastions and stepped into the unknown. And what he discovered on the other side was more than just a new continent. It was a true revelation. The Republic of the Ancestors, as the locals called it, was a world untouched by the shadow of the dark forces that ruled his homeland. Shinindam. Here, in this promised land, humanity flourished in absolute freedom. People developed at a staggering rate, unimaginable in his world. It was a society built on a foundation of resilience and ancient knowledge, and it immediately became William's new home. Here, he met a woman whose spirit was as unwavering as his own. She was a native of the Republic, and her entire life was imbued with the memory of her ancestors who had given everything in the struggle to preserve their freedom. Their union marked the beginning of a new life, filled with joy and love. Suyasaj. From this union, where determination and tenderness intertwined, their daughter was born. She became a child of two worlds. One was a world of desperate struggle and oppressive limitations. The other was a world of boundless hope and incredible possibilities. Growing up, she listened with bated breath to the stories of her parents' lives. From her mother, she absorbed tales of brutal battles waged for every inch of the Republic's land and of unimaginable sacrifices made on the altar of its survival. From her father, she heard legends of famous lands, of vast, unexplored territories where colossal potential lay hidden, suppressed by the will of cruel oppressors. Siunda. The incredible courage of her father, who had defied all odds, and the steely determination of her mother, who revered the memory of her ancestors, filled the girl's heart with a sense of great purpose. "They gave everything they had for freedom," her mother said, her voice filled with both boundless pride and deep sadness. These words were forever imprinted on her memory, igniting a burning desire to see the lands her father had once abandoned. She dreamed of one day setting foot on the soil of known lands, retracing his incredible path, and uniting two worlds so long separated by an icy chasm. William Morris was more than just a daring seafarer. He was a man driven by unwavering determination and a dream of a free future for all mankind. By the age of 34, he had already served as a seasoned naval officer in the Continental Navy. But what set him apart was not his rank, but his rock-solid refusal to accept the existing world order. His fate was forever changed by an encounter with a mysterious and charismatic man named Butler. Like William, Butler was no stranger to navigating uncharted waters. Born in the Republic of his ancestors, a land sheltered behind icy walls, he dedicated his life to the struggle to reclaim what had been taken from humanity. His experience extended far beyond maps and compasses. Butler chaired the Republic's Naval Council, making him a true strategist and ideological inspirer. During daring expeditions across uncharted lands, he and his partner devised a plan that would prove the greatest test of their courage and tactical genius. Assembling a team of the finest navigators and warriors, they set themselves a monumental task: to cross the polar ice walls that had separated the known world from the rest of the world for generations. This was no mere adventure, but a meticulously planned operation. Butler, who had overcome these treacherous obstacles many times before, became their guide. His intimate knowledge of the route turned the impossible into reality. For William, this journey was not just a physical journey, but also a moment of profound spiritual insight. The mission was mortally dangerous. The ice walls were more than just natural barriers. They were a symbol of the power of a parasitic force that divided and dominated humanity. Threat lurked behind every iceberg: enemy patrols, unimaginable weather conditions, and the constant risk of discovery. But the crew, driven by the belief that humanity could overcome any chain, persevered. The known lands were not meant to remain an eternal prison. Butler and William's partnership was more than a union of minds. It was a brotherhood forged in the crucible of shared purpose. Butler visited the known lands more times than any chronicle could ever record. He explored its darkest corners, preparing for the decisive moment. Together, they envisioned a world where humanity would finally cast off its shackles, defy its enslavers, and reclaim the freedom it had long sought. And though the path ahead was difficult and fraught with danger, both men understood that simply sitting back and waiting for change was not an option. The only way to change anything was to act, even when the odds were stacked against you. Their mission wasn't simply about survival. It was about hope. William and Butler weren't just fighting to liberate the known world. They were laying the foundation for something far greater, an alternative plan that could ensure humanity's survival in the face of the next Great Reset. This wasn't just a rebellion, it was a desperate race against time to save the very soul of humanity from complete and utter oblivion. The Nearlands, also known as the Ancestral Republic. Imagine a place sheltered behind impenetrable ice walls and mountain ranges. Here, people who survived the greatest war in history have found their home. These people are the direct descendants of the civilization that existed before the last reset, before that terrible time when the entire world as we know it was reduced to ruins. Their lands have become not just a refuge, but a living symbol of unwavering resilience and the will to survive. Long ago, their ancestors fled the horrors of war, left with no choice but to flee or perish. The few who survived overcame unimaginable odds and began a new life far from the all-consuming flames of destruction. These forefathers came from all corners of the known world, bringing with them their languages, their cultures, and their stories. Over the centuries, these disparate groups merged into a single community, creating a unique civilization while preserving the sacred memory of the world they had lost. In the Republic, people still remember the sacrifices that allowed them to survive. From generation to generation, the saga of the giants, mighty beings who saved countless families from certain death, is passed down. Without them, none of us would be here, say the elders, their eyes reflecting centuries of gratitude. The giants carried children and entire families to safe havens, preserving lives when all hope seemed lost. The memory of their courage has become sacred. The Republic's residents speak many languages, but their own native tongue has become the most widely spoken. Nevertheless, they make tremendous efforts to preserve ancient dialects, especially in smaller communities. In large cities, the connection to roots sometimes weakens, but this is a shared, conscious effort to preserve the memory of the past. The war that forced their ancestors to flee was monstrous. Millions of lives were wiped from the face of the earth, among them the grandfather of the young woman who grew up on stories of the past. He fought bravely to the very end. Her mother, a mere toddler, was carried from the fire by her grandmother. Stories like these are told here with special reverence as an eternal reminder of the price paid for the right to live. Long ago, when hope for freedom still lingered in the known lands, a great alliance was forged between humans and a race now the stuff of myth. An alliance with giants. These creatures weren't the terrifying monsters of children's stories. They were powerful allies who believed in the boundless potential of the human race. Their union became a symbol of hope, a banner inspiring the fight for freedom and the preservation of humanity's true history. They came from distant lands, scaling icy walls and mountain peaks, driven by the belief that together they could overthrow tyranny. Imagine a world where the legend of the Guardian Alliance was born. At the very heart of this alliance lay the Great Tartary, a civilization of unprecedented prosperity, where humans and giants labored shoulder to shoulder. It was a place where incredible technologies were born, where strength and harmony reigned, a shining example of the heights one can achieve when one casts aside all prejudices. Tartary shone like a beacon of hope in a dark world, and its people dared to dream of a future free from the iron grip of the colonizers. However, such brazen defiance could not go unnoticed. The Guardians, whose power extended over all known lands, saw this alliance as a mortal threat to their centuries-old dominance. Their reaction was swift and merciless. They intended not only to crush Tartary, but to erase the very mention of it from the annals of history. World maps were hastily redrawn, chronicles and annals mercilessly altered, and the giants, those noble allies of humanity, were transformed into vicious monsters in new distorted legends. They were portrayed as enemies of the gods themselves, and their true motives were buried under a thick layer of lies. But the truth was, the giants had always been protectors. Their great mission was to guard humanity's spiritual fire, the very potential that inspired such primal terror in the Guardians. For the invaders, mere control over the material world was not enough. Their true goal was to suppress the very essence of human will, hope, and resilience. The struggle for freedom proved incredibly difficult. The alliance of giants and humans unleashed a war the likes of which the world had never seen. Their combined might shook the very foundations of Costadian dominion. Victory seemed within their grasp, but the enemy proved adamant. Ultimately, the blood of those who dared to challenge fate was spilled on battlefields across the known world. The very oceans that washed these continents became silent mass graves for fallen heroes, an eternal reminder of the horrific price of disobedience. After a crushing defeat, the giants vanished. They dissolved into the shadows, but did not cease their service to humanity. Their legacy lives on in the hearts of those who believe in their existence to this day. They chose to retreat into the shadows so as not to expose themselves to further danger or bring even greater misfortune upon humanity. Their retreat was not a sign of capitulation, but an act of supreme wisdom. They understood the consequences and understood that the hour of liberation had not yet come. The Great War descended upon the world swiftly and brutally, leaving no time for preparation or reflection. The Guardians, true to their scorched earth tactics, struck directly at the largest cities. Their strategy was cold, calculated, and utterly merciless. Strike at the very heart, destroy the core of resistance, and let everything else crumble to dust. The chaos that followed these attacks became their greatest weapon, a tactic honed over countless centuries of conquest. Even before the war began, the giants tried to warn humanity of the Guardians' true intentions. They revealed their plans to deliberately poison this world's atmosphere, diabolical strategies that had already been tested on other continents, hidden behind impenetrable domes. In those distant times, very little was known about the Guardians' plans. The world looked completely different then. Imagine a planet without the ice walls and other barriers that now separate the continents. People were freer and felt an unbreakable connection to one another. After the war, the Guardians, using their monstrous power, completely transformed these lands, creating a new reality that was meant to conceal their near defeat. They distorted nature itself and erased the truth, so that not a trace of Tartaria's rebellion would remain. The Guardians branded the giants barbarians, mocking their strength and unity. In turn, humanity became an object of their deepest contempt. This war was more than just a battle for territory. It was a war against the very idea of freedom and cooperation. The Guardians sought to destroy the sacred bond between giants and humans at any cost, for they were terrified of the power such a union could generate. And although the Guardians eventually regained their control over the known lands, the legacy of Great Tartary and the sacrifices of the giants and humans who fell in its defense live on. Their story, buried under layers of lies and manipulation, serves as an eternal reminder of the true price of freedom. They stood a step away from victory over an enemy the entire world considered invincible. And even now, whispers circulate that the Great War is not over, and the courage of its heroes has not faded, awaiting the hour when humanity will rise again to finish what it began. The fall of the great cities began with an ominous omen, a thick, choking black smoke that drifted through the streets like a living, hungry shadow. It was the wrath of the Guardians, their cold and calculated retribution unleashed upon an empire built on hope and unity. This empire, Great Tartary, was a living symbol of the collaboration of humans and giants, a rare era when knowledge and technology were used together to create a society capable of challenging any oppression. The giants bestowed upon humanity tools and ideas that surpassed even the wildest imagination. Together, they achieved incredible advances. Combining their intellect and colossal strength, they prepared to challenge the Guardians' omnipotence. However, despite all their achievements, the Great War erupted faster than anyone could have imagined. Tartaria's defenses, though impressive, were no match for the Guardians' relentless onslaught. Their attacks were relentless, reducing cities to smoldering ruins, and the defenders' morale was shattered. A massive flood followed, further devastating the battered Earth. A ray of hope emerged when the Anakim, a group of giants who remained with humanity to the end, engaged in a desperate battle, employing their advanced technology. However, not all giants showed unity. Some, realizing their chances were slim, decided to withdraw from the battle, deeming resistance futile. Despite these differences, a bright flame of resistance burned in Tartary. For one brief moment, the specter of freedom became almost tangible. But this hope came at an unimaginable price. The Costadians, exhausted by the fierce resistance, responded with such brutality that it left deep scars on the very surface of the Earth. They poisoned the atmosphere, altered the climate, and erased all history. Having transformed known lands into icy wastelands, they buried the memory of Tartary under layers of lies. This war was not only physical, but also spiritual. The Guardians understood perfectly well that to completely subjugate humanity, they needed to devastate its soul. They created a system of total control, encompassing every aspect of life, a system designed to deprive people of the ability to doubt, hope, and resist. Through propaganda, they rewrote reality, forcing millions to accept lies as truth. Those who dared to challenge their authority were ridiculed, exiled, and silenced forever. But even in the shadow of hopeless despair, a spark of defiance smoldered, ready at any moment to burst into the flames of a new struggle for freedom. Although the giants suffered a crushing defeat, they continued to secretly support humanity. Inspired by the memory of the sacrifices made in Tartary, they refused to lay down their arms. Their very invisible presence served as a reminder that all was not lost, and even in the face of all-consuming darkness, there are those who never surrender. The Guardians' greatest weapon wasn't their technology, but their ability to manipulate belief. They turned truth into lies, and lies into indisputable fact. As the ancient storytellers warned, if they declared the sky pink, the whole world would repeat it until it became pink in everyone's mind. It would become law. Few would dare look up, and even fewer would dare speak the truth when they saw otherwise. It is precisely because of this terrifying reality that the battle continues. For those who know the truth, this is a struggle not for land or power, but for the very essence of humanity. Great cities may have fallen, but their stories live on in the hearts of those who refuse to surrender. The light of freedom continues to burn, and as long as rumors of resistance persist, there remains hope for a better future. The final reset in the known worlds proved unprecedented in its destructive power, carefully planned and merciless. It marked the end of an era in which humans and giants stood on the brink of liberation from the parasitic yoke that controlled their world. For a moment, victory seemed inevitable. The giants, possessing advanced knowledge and unstoppable strength, united with humanity in their sacred struggle and, for a brief period, achieved incredible success. However, the tide of the war tragically changed, and the fall of 4 great centers of civilization sealed their fate. The war left scars of unimaginable proportions. Cities once full of life and light were reduced to dead ruins, engulfed in eternal flames, or plunged into impenetrable darkness. The Guardians, desperate to regain control, descended into madness. Weapons unimaginable were unleashed. Rumors swirled of technology capable of turning living beings to stone, a terrifying echo of events long past. Those who managed to survive described this time as an endless nightmare, destroyed homes, lost loved ones, and a monstrous torrent of mud and water that swept away everything in its path. This cataclysm, known as the Mud Flood, was no random act of God. It was a deliberate act, a coldly planned step to completely reset the world. The Guardians initiated it prematurely, interrupting the cycle of development they themselves had imposed on humanity. Typically, such a reset occurred when civilization reached a certain peak, a cruel experiment in controlled growth. However, the fury of war forced them to act differently. The survivors of the reboot awoke in a completely new world, where all traces of the past were hidden under thick layers of manipulation. The monuments and cyclopean structures of the old world still stood, but their true purpose had been forgotten. They had withstood time and war, but had become silent relics of a rewritten history. The Guardians. Ancient myths and instincts merged, creating a distorted picture of the world in which it was no longer possible to distinguish safety from mortal threat. And then came the Great Reset. It was merciless. Adults, everyone larger than a certain size, were wiped from the face of the planet. Their lives were cut short as if they had never existed. Only the tiniest creatures survived, carefully selected by nature itself, the most inconspicuous and fortunate. These young survivors were to grow up in a world that seemed designed to stifle their development. Harsh conditions dictated every aspect of their existence, ensuring that no species would ever again achieve their former greatness or transcend their ecological niche. Predators, the planet's new masters, controlled every corner of this environment, ensuring that life could never again realize its true potential and cast off the shackles of fear. But then, something incredible happened. The emergence of new giants marked a turning point, lifting the veil of ignorance. They brought with them knowledge of lands beyond the familiar valley, of life beyond the confines of the familiar forest, and of the truth hidden behind the eternal struggle for survival. However, this knowledge made the tiny survivors dangerous in the eyes of the predators. The Great Reset was not just an accident. It served as a means to prevent a new flourishing. Imagine living in a vast terrarium where every element of the environment is carefully regulated by nature itself. Soil can be dried out or saturated with moisture, and light can either bestow life or burn to ashes. Such was the reality of these lands, shaped by the invisible forces of evolution. The last great extinction was a stark reminder of nature's power, its fear of losing its balance, and its willingness to sacrifice entire eras to maintain global order. But even in this darkness, traces of the past remain. Fossils and imprints of the ancient world await their time to be rediscovered. The spirit of those who fought for life remains unquenched, a quiet but determined challenge to the forces seeking to erase them from the Earth's record. The old leader, let's call him Ancestor's Will, couldn't ignore the call of his blood that tormented him every season. He had to return to his homeland, to the place where his kin now suffered. Those he considered family had vanished in the maelstrom of predatory raids, disease, and climate change that had befallen these lands. The pain of loss grew unbearable with each sunrise. Nevertheless, his resolve only grew stronger. He devoted his days to meticulously planning a great expedition to help those trapped in this prehistoric hell. For him, these lands were more than just a memory. They were a home filled with life that deserved a chance at freedom and prosperity. But the world beyond these familiar lands also concealed deadly dangers. Tireless and vengeful predators, the masters of these lands, began expanding their hunting grounds. They attacked territories that had previously remained untouched, quiet havens now under siege. One of the most shocking discoveries they made was a valley inhabited by true giants and titans. These creatures, considered mere prey by the predators, challenged their authority. They developed evolutionary adaptations, armor, spikes, incredible size, capable of outsmarting even the most sophisticated hunting methods of their oppressors. The predators attempted to storm this living fortress, but their attacks proved futile. Mighty armored lizards, allies of the giants, strengthened their defenses to unimaginable levels. The aggressors were driven out, humiliated, and forced to retreat back to their territories. This defeat left the predators in disarray. They feared losing control of their hunting grounds, their valuable food supply. In a desperate attempt to maintain their power, they began to increase border patrols, erecting invisible walls of fear separating the fertile valleys from the outside world. Natural barriers and the predators' constant military presence were used to create a seemingly impenetrable cordon. New territorial boundaries were established, and predator dens appeared throughout the region. All this was aimed at concealing the truth about the rich lands from other herds. The predators, masters of control and ambush, long believed their precious territory impregnable. However, unbeknownst to them, a network of scouts began to penetrate deeper, opening a path to salvation. The group of daredevils gradually grew, exceeding 14,000 individuals. They were the descendants of ancient herds, the result of a bold plan by their leader, devised in alliance with the leaders of giants and other species, united in a silent struggle for the liberation of their kind. This complex migration had a single purpose: to awaken the oppressed and show them the way to lands hidden behind a veil of fear. For years, these scouts operated secretly, blazing trails through key points, passes, river fords, and even the gorges that predators used to control the area. Every step was carefully planned, as the slightest trace of their presence could have catastrophic consequences, possibly even the immediate extermination of the entire herd. They moved along a path as thin as a razor blade, spreading the word of the hidden potential of new pastures and the forgotten history of their ancestors, all the while avoiding the all-seeing eyes of predators. Penetrating the heavily guarded territories was no easy task. Barriers were erected by nature itself: sheer cliffs, bogs capable of triggering localized landslides, and prides of predators tirelessly patrolled the perimeter. Yet, despite all these measures, a group of brave souls managed to overcome the defenses. For a time, it seemed their march was unstoppable, and sparks of new hope began to ignite in the hearts of those who had despaired. Then something happened that changed everything. Near an ice shelf known to scouts as False Land, a group of ancestral herd members, fighting their way through ice packs, encountered a predator ambush. When a patrol attempted to intercept them, the scouts, in a desperate attempt to escape, triggered a glacier collapse, burying both themselves and their pursuers. This incident sent shockwaves through the predator camp. The alarm was raised, and an unprecedented hunt for all outsiders began. The predators acted swiftly and brutally. Using this event as a pretext, they launched raids across numerous valleys and forests, ostensibly to eliminate hidden threats. Their natural instincts, already honed to perfection, were greatly enhanced to track every move of any new creature. Scouts who had previously operated in the shadows now faced merciless pursuit. The consequences were catastrophic. Many of the 14,000 brave souls were forced to retreat. Their mission was in jeopardy. Some were captured and torn to pieces in horrific agony, becoming food for the victors. Their sacrifices weighed heavily on those who remained and became a grim reminder of the risks they had taken in their quest for freedom. Among those who returned was the battle-hardened captain of the herd. The death of the great Alpha, Ancestor Will, was one of the most tragic moments in the struggle for survival. That day will forever be remembered by those who fought alongside him. The captain, wounded but broken by loss, slowly approached the alpha female and her cub. His wounds were visible both on his body and in his soul. Each step he took toward them seemed an eternity, and when he finally reached them, he could no longer contain his grief. Sounds of grief erupted from his chest as he told what no one wanted to hear. Ancestor Will was dead. He met his fate near the icy zone, a victim of the desperation of predators. Panicked and eager to maintain control, the predators triggered a chain reaction, transferring their hunting tactics to some smaller, more aggressive species in the disputed territories, techniques that even these predators didn't fully understand. Battle-hardened but blinded by fear, they underestimated the danger of their actions. This decision endangered their own ecosystem, as they armed those who were barely capable of wielding such power wisely with their new knowledge. Tragedy struck during the return mission. The Alpha was leading a rearguard known as the Iron Formation, accompanied by ancestors and recently awakened kin, who were attempting to escape the oppressive confines of the old lands. As they crossed the icy wastes, their formation was attacked from the air. The predators created an invisible barrier of ambushers on the cliffs, taking last-minute precautions to block the air route for the pterosaur scouts. The path opened by the ancestors proved fatal to the Iron Formation, taking the Alpha and many others with it. The captain, who was in another part of the herd, miraculously survived. His instincts captured the chaos and betrayal that reigned all around him. Trying to suppress resistance, the predators unleashed a storm of destruction beyond their control. Not only the ancestors and their allies suffered. The new tactics they imparted sparked conflict across the lands, as different species began to use deadly tactics against each other. Sophisticated hunting methods, manipulation of the landscape, and control of water sources became instruments of chaos. Herds, groups, and even individual animals vanished without a trace, destroyed by forces they could not comprehend. For the Alpha's daughter, the loss of her father was a moment of profound despair. Was it worth it? She wondered. The cause her father had fought for seemed hopeless, a battle against the insurmountable forces of nature. However, over time, despair gave way to hope. Those who remained realized the Alpha's sacrifice had not been in vain. His dream of freedom and unwavering faith in the potential of his species became a source of hope for those left behind. But the predators' actions put all known lands at risk. The new hunting methods they introduced fueled wars and exacerbated divisions between species. The Alphas used their newfound power recklessly, threatening global annihilation through the spread of disease and other destructive means. Even in the highest halls of power, at the very heart of their omnipotence, the Guardians themselves lived in constant fear. They were tormented by one thought, that one day humanity, their charges, their slaves, would turn the technologies created for them against their creators. And while this apocalyptic scenario seemed like something from the distant future, a far more real and dire threat loomed on the horizon. The threat of another reset, a complete reset of all human progress, a catastrophic rollback of civilization. And all this because of the Guardians' panicky fear of losing their total control. The battle for the soul of humanity was far from over. On the contrary, it was blazing with renewed, unprecedented vigor, fueled by the sacrifices of those who had fallen in this struggle long before us. Imagine this. The death of William Morris, a crushing blow to all, did not break, but rather steeled the will of the young republic. His name became a banner, a symbol of unconquered hope. He became the bridge that connected known lands with those corners of the world where people still dared to dream of freedom. His memory became armor for the spirit of those who continued to stand to the death against the icy, merciless grip of the Custodians. Their grand plan for liberation, though paused, was never forgotten. After all, true progress takes time, especially when the primary battlefield is not the physical world with its cities and armies, but the consciousness of each individual. Here, on this invisible front, the Guardians were unrivaled masters. Their primary weapon was total psychological control. It was an endless, toxic stream of thoughts, fears, and contradictions that they poured into people's minds to sow discord and keep humanity eternally divided and weak. Those voices in our heads, those whispers of doubt, that corrosive self-doubt, and the eternal exhausting race against each other, all of these were instruments of oppression. Perfect tools designed to sap people's will, burn out their spiritual core, and suppress any potential for growth. And yet, humanity endured. Through generations of slavery, it demonstrated astonishing resilience in the face of challenges unimaginable. Moving forward required fundamental change. Humanity had to relearn how to tune out this intrusive mental noise, silence the voices of its jailers, and return to the primal, innate strength that had allowed it to survive for millennia, despite all the monstrous manipulations. And the key to this breakthrough lay in future generations. In children. They had to be protected, sheltered from the endless stream of distractions and strife that the Guardians had deliberately created to mold them into obedient, weak-willed followers. Through the media they controlled, through science and the educational system, the Castadians maintained a stranglehold on reality. They used authority figures, scientists, and opinion leaders to ridicule, humiliate, and discredit anyone who dared challenge their absolute power. However, the solution wasn't to blindly reject these systems. No, the plan was far more cunning, to infiltrate them, to become part of this gigantic mechanism so that one day they could root out all rot and corruption from within. The Republic offered a completely different vision of the future, a future where true scientific progress was possible, hand in hand with spiritual development. The knowledge of our ancestors, the works of the greatest minds once erased from history or hidden by the Guardians, remained a critical element in this struggle. This lost, almost mythical legacy held the keys to breaking the vicious cycle of control and eternal dependence. The task seemed enormous, almost impossible, but it was achievable thanks to the unique nature of humanity itself. As the source of life itself on this world, humanity possessed a special, profound connection with the great dome that stretched overhead, and perhaps even with other distant worlds beyond. History had already seen other races triumph over the Castadians, proving to the world that freedom is more than just a dream. However, humanity's potential was entirely different, unique, and it was this that the Castadians feared most of all, this very thing they could not fully understand or calculate. This unbreakable connection to the very fabric of existence made humanity the primary force in the Great War for freedom. The Republic and its allies remain in the shadows. They act cautiously, side by side with the few who have managed to awaken and recognize the true state of affairs. They are ready for the decisive moment. They await their hour, the very opportunity to break the chains of this monstrous construct, this so-called human farm, with one powerful leap, and finally achieve eternal, true freedom. The path to this goal is long and strewn with unimaginable trials, but the dream of freedom, of a world without guards, is undoubtedly worth any price. The desire for liberation burns ever stronger in hearts, and those who wage this unequal struggle believe that one day the seeds of unity, love, and courage sown in this tormented land will surely sprout. And then the dawn will come, bringing with it a new world, a world forever free from tyranny. The majestic, deathly silence of the icy desert stretched around them. But as their ship approached the colossal mountain of frozen water, something unimaginable began to unfold in the air. An abnormal heat emanated from the melting slopes of the ice colossus, causing tons of snow to crash down into the water, boiling in the contrast. It was a violation of all the laws of nature, a warmth born in the very heart of the permafrost, a sensation that seemed wrong, alien. Captain Butler, mesmerized by this phenomenon, gave the command to keep a course close to the ice wall. It seemed he alone understood the nature of this heat emanating from this seemingly lifeless place. And then, without warning, he called William up on deck. "Look," the captain croaked, his voice a mixture of awe and steely confidence. Straight ahead, in the monolithic ice, a passage was visible, a narrow, mysterious crevice, like a gateway to another world. The crew's nerves were stretched to the breaking point, but Butler, without a moment's hesitation, steered the ship straight into that gaping blackness. His actions were precise, like a surgeon's. He acted like a man returning home. The ship's bow had barely cleared the icy gates when it was swept up in a powerful, invisible current. An inexorable force pulled them forward with such speed that every sailor caught their breath. Icy terror gripped the crew. They pressed themselves against the icy walls of the passage, narrowly avoiding a collision that would have meant certain death. Those moments seemed to stretch into eternity, until suddenly everything stopped. Absolute, deafening silence fell. The hurricane's roar died down. The bone-chilling cold was still palpable in the air, but it had become much milder, almost bearable. The icy corridor parted, revealing the serene expanse of an unknown sea before the astonished sailors. Butler's voice broke the silence. "We've made it!" he cried with undisguised triumph. The crew stood frozen in stupefaction, unable to believe their eyes. They gazed upon waters whose very existence no one could have imagined. When the ice walls became a distant streak on the horizon and the seawater took on a lighter hue, Butler gathered everyone on deck. His face was deadly serious. "What I'm about to reveal to you," he said, "affects more than just our destiny. It concerns the entire human race, its true past, that true history that only a few know." While the crew waited in tense silence for the next sentence, the silhouette of a huge ship appeared on the horizon, heading straight for them. One of the sailors climbed the mast to get a better look, but then slid down in panic. "They're coming for us," he croaked. The ship was truly cyclopean in size. Even the imperturbable Butler looked extremely tense. "Keep formation," he commanded, though a note of alarm crept into his voice. The unknown vessel approached. Its dark red hull gleamed ominously in the cold light. William's heart pounded in his chest. He had been certain they were completely alone in these waters. How sadly mistaken. Suddenly, a deafening blast of a horn echoed across the sea, followed by a voice speaking in perfect English. "Dear guests from the lands beyond the wall, please remain calm. Our men will be boarding you shortly. We mean you no harm." William was completely confused. Who were these people? Before he could collect his thoughts, 3 figures dressed in crisp white suits with blue emblems materialized on the deck of their ship. One of them, a tall, stately man, shook Butler's hand respectfully, but his gaze remained cold and searching. "What brings you beyond the wall?" he asked, scanning each crew member. Butler calmly replied that their ship had been carried by a powerful current beyond the Arctic Circle. William watched this scene with growing unease. He detected a strange, almost familiar note in the exchange between Butler and these strangers, but couldn't place it. The man in white exchanged glances with his companions. "It's been a long time since anyone has crossed these walls," he said, as if thinking aloud. Then he handed Butler a map. "Follow this course, and you'll reach safe lands." Unable to contain himself any longer, William interjected, "Safe lands?" "So there are unsafe ones too?" The man standing behind him replied with a grim grin. "The lands you come from are far less safe." He looked back at Butler and added, "Stay on course, and you will reach the Republic." The strangers vanished as quickly as they had appeared, leaving behind an oppressive silence laced with hidden threats. Butler gathered the shocked crew. "We must follow their instructions," he stated firmly. "We have crossed forbidden waters. There are forces that would prefer no one know what lies beyond the ice barrier." For several days they sailed in a tense atmosphere. Butler remained silent, evading any questions, but his tone grew even more serious as he reminded them of the powerful interests they had crossed. "Be on guard," he warned. "We are in war territory, even if we cannot see the enemy." After several weeks on the open sea, the harsh cold began to recede, giving way to a milder climate. Birds appeared in the sky, and exotic vegetation appeared on the surface of the water. Fear gradually gave way to the anticipation of a great discovery. One late night, the lights of a gigantic, surreal city appeared on the horizon. When they docked at the port, they were met by officials in stern uniforms. They introduced the city as part of the ancestral republic. Butler spoke on behalf of the entire crew, but William's mind was swirling with thousands of questions. Before he could ask them, one of the agents announced that the President of the Republic wished to see him immediately. William followed the agent through the brightly lit streets, amazed by the unprecedented technology and absolute silence. No horses, no carriages, only calm, sunlit avenues. They approached a massive stone building marked Presidential Office, where they were met by a man who introduced himself as President Fail. "Mr. Morris," Fail began, "I would have preferred your visit to take place under more favorable circumstances." The president sighed heavily. "Your journey through the wall has complicated matters considerably. I'll be brief. We are in the midst of an ancient war, and your people, they are part of what we call old humanity." William was stunned. "Old humanity?" he repeated. Fail nodded gravely. "There have been many resets. When the rulers feel threatened, they reset civilization, wiping out most of the population and leaving only the young for a new beginning. Your crossing the wall could have attracted their attention, jeopardizing our lands and everything we've worked so hard to preserve." Stunned, shaken to the core, William could barely comprehend what he'd heard. As he was led back to the ship, his head reeled from the weight of this revelation. Returning to the deck, he relayed the president's words to the crew. They were just beginning to comprehend the full horror of the situation when a deafening explosion ripped through the night. The ground shook with such force that it seemed their ship would capsize. Sirens blared across the city and flames shot skyward from all directions, plunging everything into utter chaos. What they had so feared had happened. The enemy had reached the ancestral republic. William was paralyzed with horror. He stared at the besieged city in utter daze, people trapped beneath the ruins of buildings, their desperate cries drowned out by the distant cannonade. Small silver spheres with red lights hovered silently overhead, silently observing the destruction. Their purpose and origin were a complete mystery. Someone nearby shouted over the blare of sirens, "We need to get to the president's office." Barely comprehending the scale of the disaster, William forced himself to run, helping the wounded along the way. The sky overhead had taken on a deep red-crimson hue. It was as dark as a total eclipse, casting an eerie glare across the ruins of the city. He looked up, stunned by this unnatural sight. "Who controls these spheres?" flashed through his mind. Reaching the presidential office, he realized he had lost his command in the chaos. His training as a Continental Navy officer paid off. He felt a duty to protect this city. Wounded civilians were everywhere, and their suffering only strengthened his resolve. At that moment, he saw Butler and President Fail across the crowded hall. A surge of relief washed over him, and he rushed toward them. Fail's face was tense, his voice trembling as he barked orders into the small communicator. "We need the Anakim's support," he repeated. "It was a brilliantly planned attack," Butler said, looking confidently at William. "They call themselves the Giants, warriors from the south." William's head spun, but Fail respectfully corrected the captain. "They are only warriors. The true masters are those who brought us here before the last reset." Suddenly, Fail excused himself and left William alone with Butler. "Follow me," the captain commanded, leading him through the crowd and down the corridors. "We need to rest and gather the rest of the crew. The next stage of our journey awaits us." A question formed in William's mind. "Where are we going now?" he asked. Butler's face softened. "It's time for you to know the whole truth," he said. "I belong here, William. The blood of the ancients flows within me. What you saw today is merely a continuation of a war that began long before you were born. We are heading for the lands of the Anakim." Without another word, Butler disappeared into the crowd of agents. William, in deep shock, sank onto the nearest cot, but sleep would not come. Images of destruction haunted him. He realized the world he knew was left behind, shrouded in lies and darkness. Now he was part of the struggle for the survival of all humanity, a humanity whose true story had never been told. After a restless sleep filled with the distant rumble of explosions, William was awakened by Butler's voice. "Rise, William, it's time." The captain's tone was as hard as steel. Stunned, William barely had time to comprehend the gravity of their situation. The enemy was striking, though he still had no idea who it was or what their goals were. The crew was back together, and everyone was overjoyed to see each other alive. They quickly moved through the eerily empty corridors toward the city's evacuation point. One of the sailors whispered in William's ear, We saw huge machines. They were moving." Picture this scene. Overhead, in skies torn apart by war, unprecedented steel trains and enormous ships rush past. They move along invisible tracks, carrying the survivors away at a staggering, unimaginable speed. Their guide, a man named Butler, urges the group on. "We only have 12 minutes to board one of these ships." His voice is tense. "Any questions later, once we're safe." Making his way through the maze of twisted metal and broken glass that littered the deserted streets, William paused for a moment. His gaze involuntarily turned upward to the wounded sky. The tiny glowing spheres that had once hung there were gone. In their place were colossal blue triangles, giant constructs that cleaved the sky like silent metallic birds of prey. He was mesmerized by the sight, unable to tear his eyes away, but Butler's commanding hand tugged him along. "Focus, William." These blue guardians on our soil are the only thing holding back the enemy. When they finally reached the launch pad, the sternly uniformed agents gestured toward a silver platform. It lifted them gently toward one of the colossal ships hovering in the air. The scene before them seemed ripped from a surreal dream. On one side, flames raged to the horizon, columns of black smoke billowing into the sky. On the other, a high-tech, pristine city of the future glowed with lights. Butler, looking at this apocalyptic sky, muttered under his breath that it reminded him of scenes from the Nuremberg portraits. They found themselves inside a huge blue ship, surprisingly spacious and elegant. William and his companions took their seats next to Butler, who gestured for them to remain calm. As the ship silently began to move, one of their small group lost consciousness under the strain, but fortunately quickly regained consciousness. William gripped his seat, feeling the powerful yet utterly silent movement knock the ground from under his feet, upsetting his usual sense of balance. Butler, noticing his distress, looked at him reassuringly, trying to calm him with just a glance. The ship raced through tunnels, plunging them into absolute darkness, and then suddenly emerged above endless green fields and orchards brimming with exotic fruits. All this lush land surrounded a distant city named Renoker. Here, the planet was beautiful and teeming with life. Gazing at this idyllic panorama, William thought he must be seeing a glimpse of ancient Eden, so striking was the contrast with the chaos he'd left behind. The silence, broken only by the faint hum of the ship, was shattered by Butler's voice. There was no hint of hope in his tone, only a cold, grim statement of fact. "Out there, they're poisoning the very air, William. The primary goal of the so-called Guardians is to shorten life expectancy. They want generations to pass quickly, die young, and never have time to ask the right questions." William, stunned by what he'd heard, stared at him. "You mean they control us, making us weaker, poisoning us?" Butler confirmed his guess with a heavy sigh. "Here, in these lands, people live 3 times longer, but even here, the Guardians have tried to infiltrate. Their goal is always the same, to shorten our lives and establish total control. That's why we fight so desperately." Without delay, the ship reached the capital, which the locals called the Ark, or Eliarka. As they stepped onto the platform, William froze, awestruck by the sight before him. Impossibly tall glass and metal spires, piercing the sky, glowed softly in the rays of the most stunning sunset he had ever seen. Flying transport pods glided silently overhead, and the air was crystal clear and still. This city was a living embodiment of what humanity could achieve if it freed itself from the dark shadow of the Guardians. Its graceful towers and bustling airways were filled with people moving with effortless grace, in perfect harmony with one another. Butler led his team swiftly into the city, never looking back. They barely kept up with him, following past hovering vehicles. High in the sky, transparent glass spheres floated, each easily carrying its passengers. Despite the war raging far away, the city exuded an aura of imperturbable calm, as if the chaos of the outside world couldn't touch its walls. Questions swirled in William's mind. Who were these Anakim? And what strange, ancient language did they speak here? Perhaps it was a relic of a bygone era, the remnants of some other, previous humanity. Soon, they arrived at a vast harbour. Butler gestured for them to wait, then walked over to the local officers. The crew exchanged worried glances, whispering about the strange and alien world they had found themselves in. They were tormented by the same question. Had the wrath of the Guardians followed them? After a while, Butler returned. "We will board this vessel," he said, pointing to the elegant ship moored at the pier. "It looks very much like the one that found us there, beyond the ice wall. Our journey leads first to my home island, and then we will travel to the lands of the Anakim." Once on board, William couldn't help but marvel at the perfection of the local technology. The ship glided across the surface of the water with incredible grace, creating not a single wave, like a ghost in slow motion. The water beneath them was unnaturally calm, and the sky was strikingly different from what he was accustomed to. The sunlight seemed brighter here, and above hung another orb, blue-black, motionless, yet clearly visible. They sped along at incredible speed and soon reached Butler's Island, Danonde. There, on a simple but stunningly beautiful shore, they were met by a young girl who, with a joyful cry, threw herself into Butler's arms. Beside her stood a woman with a gentle, welcoming smile. "Welcome to my home, friends," Butler said, introducing his family. They were housed in neighboring houses, and for 2 nights they enjoyed rare moments of peace. However, William's mind was in turmoil. He could not find peace. One evening, as they watched the sunset together, William finally decided to ask the question that had been bothering him all this time. Butler's gaze was fixed on something distant. "They have shaped your mind, William," he said quietly. "The Guardians have created a world of constant mental noise. This endless information storm makes people dependent on fleeting thoughts and superficial perceptions." In this way, they distance you from the truth, obscuring your true purpose. "You must understand," Butler continued, "that the true purpose of human existence is hidden behind this veil of endless conflict and imposed fears." William listened, holding his breath, trying to comprehend the depth of these words. "Our entire true history is hidden," Butler said. "If people knew the truth about their past, they would not live in this cocoon of ignorance, bound by the invisible chains of those who seek to control them." William was silent, crushed by the weight of this revelation. That night, the sky above him seemed bottomless, holding secrets he was only just beginning to comprehend. The next morning, under the rays of an unfamiliar sun, they set out for the lands of the Anakim, ready to face whatever lay ahead. Their journey to the shifting Toto Isles took place in a strange perpetual twilight, where day was barely distinguished from night. A pale full moon hung constantly in the sky, casting a ghostly light that barely faded as they progressed. Occasionally, steel ships flew overhead, silent witnesses to their journey. When William and his companions arrived at the port of Toto, they were met by impressive military aircraft, and weapons of unprecedented design were arrayed along the docks. Disembarking, they saw a tall man with a long red beard and a striking woman with hair the color of molten gold. Although not true giants, their height, clearly exceeding 2 meters, made a lasting impression. The woman, who introduced herself as Shiki, spoke their language, but with an unusual ancient accent. The group followed her to the center of the settlement, where domed structures and giant statues towered, offering breathtaking views of lush landscapes and sparkling waters. William's thoughts were in complete chaos. Just a few weeks ago, such a sight would have left him speechless, but now here he stood, among the mythical giants of Thoth. Butler began sharing stories about his masters. The blood of ancient ancestors, both human and giant, flows in the veins of the Toto giants, he said. Long ago, they united with our ancestors to oppose the Guardians. Thus was formed the alliance known in your legends as Great Tartary. It was a powerful civilization that changed the course of history in our lands. At that moment, Shiki returned. She held a huge, ancient book in her hands, which she solemnly handed to William. He opened it reverently, seeing maps and charts of lands completely unfamiliar to him. "This will help you better understand our history," she said softly, watching his reaction carefully. His hands trembled as he turned the heavy pages, examining the familiar outlines of continents, and, alongside them, vast territories marked with unknown names and unexplored mysteries. "How many lands are there?" he asked, awe in his voice. "At least 178 known worlds," she replied, "and countless more remain undiscovered." Butler added, "And that doesn't count the small islands and lands beyond." A page titled "Lands of the Anunnaki" caught their attention. Shiki's face instantly became serious. "The Anunnaki," she explained, "have always been hostile to humans. They are bound by an ancient treaty with the Guardians." William's heart pounded as he tried to digest this information. With each new discovery, he realized more and more clearly that he was on the threshold of understanding a great truth about human origins and a world far greater than he could have imagined. The history of the giants was buried and forgotten, hidden in the mists of time, like the bones of their ancestors. Their legacy, their great resistance, was deliberately suppressed by the Guardians. Their memory was erased so that humanity would never know they could challenge their invisible enslavers. William reflected on this lost glory as he drifted into a restless sleep beneath an alien sky, his mind overflowing with revelations from days gone by. Morning brought clear skies. Shiki led the group to a quiet corner, as if anticipating an important conversation. "Please tell me more about the history of the giants," William asked. She opened the massive book again and pointed to one of the illustrations. "Here they are, the custodians, or Wasnam," she said. "The custodians and Anunnaki are colonizing races, William." "They penetrate worlds called circles, and then mercilessly exploit their resources and populations." Her voice quieted as she continued her story. "They mapped all the known worlds and made an ancient treaty to divide these lands among themselves and establish their own order." William's curiosity was piqued. "You mentioned domes. What are they, exactly?" he asked. "Each world is contained within its own dome," Shiki explained. "They are invisible barriers separating each system, much like a cellular membrane. These circles are connected by portals, though they are extremely difficult to detect. But there is one land the Guardians have never been able to reach, a land that has become their obsession. The Skylands." She fell silent, leaving the main question unanswered. Why couldn't they get there? How do we get in there?" William's question was almost a whisper, lost in the tense silence. Shiki paused for a moment, her answer visibly labored. The technology they relied on proved powerless against this barrier. She recounted the fate of the Guardians, those of the Iwanunak race who dared to challenge the forbidden boundary. Any who attempted to set foot on the sacred ground were instantly reduced to nothing. Over time, it became clear the heavenly realms were not for beings of flesh and blood. They were inhabited by something else, pure energy, a powerful force they called the Source. The woman fell silent, her gaze seeming to pierce space and time. "They concluded," she continued, "that this source possesses a mind of its own, It senses alien intrusion, recognizes the threat posed by the Guardians, and responds with a crushing blow, defending its abode. William's heart pounded in his chest. "And what does this mean for us?" His voice wavered. Shaky continued. "Legends say that the source itself gave birth to 5 great masters. They became the architects of humanity, shaping civilizations in mythical lands such as Asgard, Lemuria, and the legendary Atlantis, places where the line between worlds was particularly thin. And herein lies the central secret, the reason the Guardians so desperately seek to enslave humanity. If humanity were to learn of its divine origins, a power would awaken within it that no chain could restrain." Shaker's story crashed down on William like an avalanche, leaving him frozen in awe. He suddenly realized that the giants, these ancient Guardians, had been watching the tragedy of the human race all this time. He stood on the threshold of a revelation that could upend his entire worldview. The picture became ever clearer. The Guardians had hidden the truth about the spark of life energy that burns within every person for centuries. They had manipulated entire nations, wiped civilizations from the face of the earth, just to preserve this secret. William was shaken to the core. Sheikah, maintaining an icy calm, continued her saga. Both the Custodians and the Anunnaki had long known of this inexhaustible source. For centuries, they had wrestled with the mystery of how to harness it. When their sights fell on the gold-filled mountains of Asgard, they invaded without hesitation, hoping to exploit both the people and their wealth. But they met with resounding failure. No matter what they did, no matter how hard they tried, they could not capture the very energy that left the human body after death and returned to the heavenly lands. In desperation, they resorted to extreme measures. Countless lives were sacrificed in bloody rituals, entire nations were decimated by artificial epidemics, and brutal wars were waged. But mastery of this primordial force remained an elusive dream. William listened, his mind whirling. Every new word, every revelation shattered the familiar worldview, replacing it with a mosaic of conspiracies and cosmic drama. "So that's why they needed the resets," he said, fitting the puzzle pieces together. "To make us weaker, to control us through disease, shortened lives, and total lies." Shaky nodded, confirming his guess. "Exactly. Each new reset erased history until humans completely forgot their true potential." In the eyes of the Guardians, humanity became expendable, a tool for resource extraction and the construction of monuments to the glory of their eternal dominion. She explained that over time, a rift developed between the invaders themselves, the Custodians, and the Anunnaki. Each faction craved sole control over the known lands and their vast gold reserves. The giants and their human allies exploited this internal conflict. They created pockets of resistance on the free islands and at the foot of the ice walls, laying the foundations for what would go down in history as Great Tartary. During that great era, Shiki continued, the giants lived side by side with humans. They created joint armies and developed incredible technologies powered by free energy. The majestic pyramids, once the unshakable symbols of the Custodians' power, were reduced to ruins. Their monuments to hubris were razed to the ground. From the ashes of the old world, Tartaria rose, a power the Custodians could no longer ignore or control. When the Custodians returned from their Star Wars, they found their former colony in flames and chaos. Rebellion raged everywhere, with giants and humans fighting shoulder to shoulder against centuries of oppression. During their years of absence, the giants had developed advanced defensive systems, some of which were based on technology stolen from the Custodians themselves. The rebels had become a force to be reckoned with. The Guardians decided to resort to a tried-and-true method, stage another reset to regain full control. But their pyramids, once the source of their power, now lay in ruins. Gritting their teeth, the Guardians were forced to enter into a temporary alliance with the Anunnaki, exchanging gold for secret knowledge in a desperate attempt to restore their former glory. However, when leaving the system, they made a fatal mistake. They left behind a grey race from the planet Zeta Reticuli as overseers. But the Greys, consumed by their own resentment and arrogance, fatally underestimated the strength of the human spirit and the power of its alliance with the giants. The rebellion engulfed all known lands. Armies of humans and giants clashed in titanic battles against the legions of the Guardians, battles that scorched the earth to its foundations. Despite the skies filled with enemy ships spewing streams of plasma, the Guardians resorted to their most terrifying weapon. They began manipulating the planet itself. By summoning monstrous storms and tectonic catastrophes, they managed to tip the scales in their favor. Realizing that defeat was inevitable, the giants made the difficult decision to retreat. They fled north and south, using secret passages behind the icy walls. Some humans followed them, heading to lands forever hidden from the all-seeing eye of the Guardians, a region that would later be called the Republic of the Ancestors. Sheikah's words echoed in William's mind. Those who managed to escape the oppression began to build a new world from scratch. They reconnected with the source, piece by piece reconstructing humanity's true history and purpose. And they vowed to one day free all who remained captive. Butler confirmed her words, adding the bitter truth: the giants would no longer fight alongside them. The last battle had cost them too much, and they feared total annihilation if they again incurred the wrath of the Guardians. When it was time to say goodbye, Butler looked William straight in the eye. Consider the risk you're taking. If you returned to the known lands now with this knowledge, at best they'd call you mad, and at worst... He didn't finish. The Guardians had perfected their control system. With the help of the Greys, they'd learned to monitor consciousness, and anyone who asked uncomfortable questions was instantly turned into a pariah. They drifted away, bearing on their shoulders the unbearable weight of an entire species' lost history. The night passed in ringing silence. The air seemed thick with the realization of everything William had gleaned from Sheikah's book. It was more than knowledge, it was a revelation. The idea that a piece of the great source lives within every person connected him with an invisible thread to the billions of souls erased from existence during previous resets. A whole river of lives, interrupted and used by the Guardians for their own selfish purposes. Morning greeted them with a light rain as the ship approached the shore. The drops seemed to tenderly remind them of life itself. The city of Antarctica appeared on the horizon. Its lights, shimmering under a leaden sky, were a promise of freedom. It was a place of peace and harmony, untouched by the tyranny of the Guardians. Here, it seemed, humanity could finally breathe freely, free from fear, pain, and humiliating exploitation. And yet, William's heart sank with the bitter realization: those he left behind beyond the wall would never even know this paradise existed. The captain suggested they disembark and explore the city, noting that money had no value here. The Republic lived by laws unrelated to gold or material wealth. While the others curiously explored Antarctica, William remained on the ship. Lost in heavy thoughts, he wandered alone along the deck in the drizzling rain. He was tormented by a feeling of emptiness and powerlessness. How could he convey this terrible truth to those still languishing in the cage built by the Guardians? Time passed unnoticed. The city streets were filled with the quiet hum of voices and the sounds of music, which flowed like a river, bouncing off the walls of the buildings. Passers-by glanced at him with interest. His tattered foreign clothes contrasted strikingly with their simple yet elegant attire. A man tried to speak to him, but William, not understanding the language, could only mumble something inaudible in response. Following the stranger's silent gesture, he entered the nearest building. When he returned to the port, his soul was filled with both delight at the wonders of this new world and unbearable pain for those left in the darkness of ignorance. Butler pulled up in a sleek car and gestured for him to enter. A rare look of concern crossed his face. "We've been unable to secure direct support from the Anakim," he explained. "They're afraid to risk their people. but I believe they'll come to our aid when the moment demands it." He paused. "Our recent skirmish showed the Guardians that Republic technology isn't lost. They came expecting an easy ride, but we sent them running. We've instilled in them a fear they won't soon forget." William nodded silently. As Butler spoke, a faint hope began to rise in his soul. There was still a chance, but any step forward required the utmost caution and meticulous preparation. The successes of the Republic and its allies gave hope to those left behind. Butler's voice was firm as he addressed the group gathered on the yacht, and every word carried the weight of newfound knowledge. "This is our chance to change the course of history," he proclaimed, raising his glass to mark the beginning of their long journey. A rare smile of hope lit up the faces around him. And yet, William's heart was heavy. Anxiety wouldn't leave him. Questions swirled in his head, nagging at him. Would they ever be able to completely free themselves from the Guardians' control? And if so, how many generations would have to pass there, beyond those icy walls, before truth would prevail? Sensing his confusion, Butler placed a friendly hand on his shoulder. "We can do far more for them here," he said quietly, "than if we return and become easy targets for the Guardians." Meanwhile, the captain had already begun collecting books and materials on the language and structure of the Republic. He understood that they would need all the knowledge they could get to withstand the coming trials. Days merged into years. William found himself in this strange, timeless place, where the very flow of time seemed to slow, almost unreal. As he gained a deeper understanding of the Republic's ways, his influence grew. Eventually, he was appointed Commander-in-Chief of the naval forces. Now, along with other leaders, he devised strategies for targeted strikes against the custodian forces, striving to act with surgical precision so as not to endanger the lives of innocents. However, their plans were too often thwarted. The custodian bases in the known worlds were elusive. They were constantly moving, hidden behind energy portals and in impenetrable fortified areas. But worst of all were the people themselves. They were the guardians of their own prison. Generations, raised on blind loyalty, were ready to lay down their lives for these icy barriers, never realizing they were protecting not borders, but the walls of a cage in which their own people were trapped. At the same time, a completely different picture was unfolding before William's eyes. He had entered a world where harmony reigned, a society untouched by the poisonous greed and the shadow of crime. Here, leaders held their positions not for unlimited power, but out of a deep, sincere affection for their people. The inhabitants of this republic found value in simplicity, introspection, and spiritual development. William began to see the light. The very essence of this republic was built on the idea they called ego death, liberation from the shackles of one's own personality, from those traps of self-definition that so easily and imperceptibly enslave the human mind. And in this light, he took a new look at the so-called known lands. He realized that their entire structure had been carefully designed with one goal in mind: to suppress this inner growth. The Guardians had perfected entire systems designed to distract people from their true purpose. Imagine. Paper money, national borders, even science in their hands had become sophisticated instruments that cut people off from their deepest essence. They locked people in a reality where everything was defined by materialism, endless consumption, and unquestioning obedience. Butler's words were a revelation to William, giving form to what he had only dimly sensed. "The real war," he said, "will always be fought not on the battlefield, but within each of us. In the depths of the human soul, where love clashes with the empty temptations of power." A great dictatorship, born of greed and the loss of all humanity, now seemed not just a threat, but an inevitable future. Inevitable, unless people can find a way to value something more than mere physical survival. At dawn, Butler and Faye appeared. Their faces were tense, but their eyes were filled with steely determination. They presented a new plan, a daring scheme that offered hope without condemning countless lives on both sides of the icy walls to ruin. Yes, the Guardians, or Custodians as they were called, had invested colossal resources in technology and weaponry. Their war machine was a formidable force. However, as Butler argued, there was one huge chink in their shining armor, a complete total lack of understanding of the spiritual side of existence. They are intelligent, no doubt, he noted, but they are terrified of anything beyond their control. We know that the very existence of the ancient humans and the Anakim still haunts them, and despite having all the firepower in the world, they have hesitated to attack us directly for many years. The question is, why? Their meeting dragged on for hours. They discussed strategies for infiltrating the known worlds undetected. They learned of the sophisticated warning system the Guardians had installed at every entrance to the dome. It was tuned to detect the presence of the ancestors and triggered localized seismic tremors whenever one approached. This seismic barrier was one of the main reasons why the Republic hadn't risked sending new forces, relying instead on its agents who had been planted within the Guardian system many years earlier. Butler detailed the plan. We'll attempt a breach through a secret choke point known as the Summer Portal. There's every reason to believe it will allow us to slip past their all-seeing sensors. Once inside, our agents will go into action. Their job is to quietly spread information, planting hints about the Republic, hinting at the existence of other lands. This should be enough to sow the seeds of doubt, but not to raise a full-scale alarm. He spoke of whispers of freedom, of hints of hidden truth that might reach the ears of those ready to ask questions. But he had to proceed with extreme caution. Butler understood perfectly well. The consciousness of many people had been so deeply poisoned by the Guardians' ideology that they would reject these ideas outright. And, oddly enough, it was precisely this mass rejection that gave them precious time to calmly build their influence. Other methods were also discussed in parallel, teaching special spiritual techniques that could help people break their mental shackles. These practices had once been used by the ancestors themselves to lead humanity beyond the controlled reality imposed upon them. Butler was adamant. Only then, he said, when enough minds awaken, will these icy walls become for everyone what they truly are, prison walls. Despite their hope, everyone recognized the mortal danger. Any attempt to breach the ice barriers by force could have catastrophic consequences. There was a grave risk that their rebellion would be brutally and swiftly suppressed, perhaps through mass intimidation tactics, or, worse, direct military intervention. One morning, Butler and Fowle re-entered the office with the air of men who had made a final decision. They finalized their plan to rescue those still held captive by the Guardians. Direct confrontation was out of the question. It would be suicidal. It would endanger everyone, the people within the walls, the ancestors of the Republic, and even the neighboring lands. Their only weapon was cunning. The Custodians rely on brute force, weapons, and tactics, Butler began, his voice harsh but confident. However, like any race, they have their vulnerabilities. They have never been able to comprehend the full depth of spiritual power. As they worked out the details of the plan, the incredible precision it required became clear. The Guardians had established a highly organized surveillance system at every entrance to the domes. The appearance of even a single ancestor could trigger the very same tremors that instantly put all their forces on alert. This explained why certain regions of the planet seemed to be constantly shaken by small tremors, and why sending new people through known passages was mortally dangerous. Butler's gaze hardened like steel. But there's one place they don't control entirely. That summer portal. If our calculations are correct, we should be able to slip inside completely undetected. Once beyond the wall, the mission was to sow seeds of awareness. They had to casually mention the Republic, hint at lands beyond the ice barrier, and whisper about humanity's true past. No grand pronouncements, no direct evidence. Only the ideas themselves mattered. These scraps of information were to spread throughout society, passed from one person to another, until the truth became so obvious that it could no longer be hidden. They understood that most people would simply dismiss these timid messages, too dependent on the Guardian's centuries-old legacy of lies. But, paradoxically, it was precisely this resistance that gave them their greatest advantage. Time. Gradually, they could increase their efforts, spreading deeper spiritual teachings capable of awakening minds and opening hearts. When enough people shed these mental chains, Butler concluded, they will be ready to see what truly lies behind these walls. But the risk remained. Sooner or later, explorers from the known lands would inevitably encounter icy barriers, and the Guardians would crush any dissent without a second thought, through fear or brute force. The summer portal proved a resounding success. For years, the Guardians remained unaware of the presence of the ancient teachers who operated secretly in the known lands. Each of them worked with extreme caution, preaching love, compassion, and speaking of the true power hidden within the human soul. Their words sparked understanding in the minds of their listeners, but Fail was adamant. He placed the strictest ban on Butler and the core team from even approaching the zone. "If they capture us," he warned, "they will turn us inside out for information. One false step, and our entire plan will crumble to dust." The mission was fraught with danger. When the first signs emerged that the Guardians were manipulating their teachings, distorting messages, and making their own changes, the agents immediately regrouped to avoid detection. However, Butler understood that their tactics could not maintain this illusion forever. As resistance mounted, he carefully planned the next, even more daring stage. "A sailor from our lands will enter their world," he explained, a note of solemnity in his voice. "He will tell his story. He will tell of other lands and merely hint at the existence of a republic. They will not even understand how it happened." The crew understood that the message had to be incredibly subtle. The stories had to touch on familiar economic and social issues to avoid arousing unnecessary suspicion. Having reached familiar lands, the navigator began sharing his story with anyone willing to listen. He mentioned strange maps, ancient legends, and even giants, just enough to pique curiosity. But the Guardians soon intervened. They rewrote his stories, redacting the most important details, and threw him into prison, leaving the world with only distorted fragments of the truth. In his haste, he managed to escape and return to the Republic to warn of the Guardians' growing paranoia. With renewed vigor, the Guardians descended upon humanity. They began pushing it to create technologies for which it was not spiritually prepared. The consequences were chaotic: bloody wars, terrible epidemics, global crises. All of this served one purpose: to distract attention and strengthen control. Mysterious expeditions to Antarctica began, financed by leaders with direct ties to the Guardian Council. Meanwhile, heliocentric teachings were instilled in schools, only strengthening their hold on minds. Military bases were hastily erected along the entire icy ring. Exclusion zones were expanded, and a thick veil of silence shrouded the truth about the lands beyond. Then came the blood-curdling news. Operation High Jump. The custodians had dispatched a military force under the command of a man named Richard Byrd to engage them in direct confrontation. Though only scant information reached the outside world, the Republic knew Byrd's true intentions. The Anakim, true to their principles of peace, attempted to negotiate with the forces stationed just beyond the dome. There, on neutral ground, the leaders of both sides met, and a fragile truce hung in the air. But Byrd soon revealed his true colors, selling the secrets of Anakim technology to the custodians. Rumors circulated that he was rewarded for this betrayal with his own mission to Mars. Using humans as foot soldiers in their dirty game, the custodians skillfully confronted these ancient people with their own past, preventing them from realizing who their true enemy was. As time passed, the custodians only intensified their attacks within society, provoking catastrophes and wars. And then, a faint, barely perceptible tremor of doubt began to shake the very foundations of the prison they had built. This tremor only grew. Ancient secrets, hints of boundless lands and unknown territories beyond the icy walls began to leak out to those few willing to open their minds, and while the Guardians, with the last of their strength, tightened their grip on control, the Ancestral Republic prepared for what was inevitably to come. Their enemy's power was beginning to crack. Finally. The awakening of a new era was inevitable. The final act of this grand drama was already on the horizon, but its outcome depended on one decisive factor: whether the ancient giants could adapt to the changes. They had to transcend their familiar way of life and recognize the threat looming over their world. Otherwise, any changes to the ecosystem would only increase their vulnerability, turning new, more advanced species into ruthless invaders, and the giants themselves into the last defenders of a dying order. The ancient world system, which had existed for tens of millions of years, was deeply woven into every aspect of their existence. Even the air itself was changing, its composition no longer the same, weakening the old species and turning their survival into a glimmer of hope. Although resistance to evolution was already emerging in some corners of the planet, it was not yet powerful enough to reverse the course of events. And yet, unexpected players soon appeared on the scene. Various groups of dinosaurs, recognizing the vulnerability of the old predators and the waning dominance of the dinosaurs, began their own expansion. Among them were the first tyrannosauroids, a lineage of reptiles with a more sophisticated build and a deadly grip. They sought to see the old kings, like Allosaurus, dethroned and their thrones taken. These new predators had close evolutionary ties to their smaller but agile ancestors, allowing them to hone their hunting tactics by observing how the older giants used brute force. They all shared a common history of struggle for survival. The ancestors of tyrannosaurs had nearly been exterminated by the larger predators of the Jurassic period, but miraculously found their niche and evolved into a thriving and formidable lineage of predators. Now, with the changing world, they sought ways to penetrate the territories where the dominance of the old dynasties remained most firmly entrenched. At the end of the Cretaceous, the continent of Laramedia became a refuge for numerous species living under the strict rule of giant predators. The herbivorous inhabitants of these lands became part of a new world that had undergone significant changes following yet another evolutionary leap. Each of them earned their place in this ecosystem, demonstrating incredible adaptability, often at the cost of the extinction of entire populations of their species. This isolated land, permeated with the scent of fear and the struggle for survival, became a symbol of a cautionary tale for future generations. Nevertheless, in areas not yet under the control of the new apex predators, life continued to thrive. These unexplored regions, left untouched by ruthless conquerors, provided a variety of species with the opportunity to find their own path to prosperity. Over the millennia, these areas became veritable paradises of the ancient world until the hour of the great tyrants arrived, when the new predators once again set their sights on the lands of the herbivores. They drove herds into remote canyons, cutting off their escape routes and disorienting them, revealing themselves as the true gods of this world. One such leader, the gigantic Carcharodontosaurus, established his kingdom in a vast river valley near the mangroves, terrorizing all living things in the area. His intention was clear: to keep the local species isolated, lest they ever learn of the rich pastures beyond his domain, where their true chances for survival lay. The lands this monster claimed bore the imprint of his claws and were under his complete sway. He taught the herbivores the ultimate law, the law of fear, keeping them under his strict control throughout his life. His proximity to packs of smaller predators, such as raptors, furthered his authority, especially since these agile hunters, then the lowest caste of predators, aided him by finishing off weakened prey and ensuring his will was carried out. Lands where fear reigned were ruled by creatures known as dromaeosaurs. These creatures thrived in the midst of hidden hostility, honing their tactics solely for hunting and domination. They had no purpose other than satiating their hunger, though their capabilities were limited by their size. The neighboring kingdom of Abelisauridae suffered a similar fate. Both groups were early overshadowed by larger predators, who used them as ideal forest orderlies, dispassionate, efficient, and docile. Nature itself sent packs of dromaeosaurs on numerous forays to explore territories and map hunting grounds. Their duties included reconnaissance, surprise attacks, and control of populations from known lands to distant swamps. However, during the age of giant sauropods, dromaeosaurs failed in their attempt to hunt these colossi. The titans proved too much for them, and important information about their limits became clear. As a result, tensions arose between them and their mighty titan neighbors. Minor skirmishes ensued, which, as it turned out, unexpectedly benefited both the sauropods themselves and other herbivores. This occurred shortly before apex predators finally established themselves at the top of the food chain. Some paleontologists believe that dromaeosaurs were direct descendants of more ancient and primitive predators, a race evolved to subjugate the weaker. Their survival depended on pack hunting, and their movements were mechanized and emotionless. However, the truth turned out to be even more surprising. They descended from small, feathered ancestors that lived under the forest canopy, a world that larger dinosaurs conquered and colonized. Despite their evolutionary achievements, dromaeosaurs were nearly wiped out after another encounter with giant predators. To avoid extinction, they switched to smaller prey, surviving in the shadow of the giants. Their homeworld, an ancient Jurassic forest, was teeming with life. Vast fern beds and fertile soils teemed with a diverse array of plants and animals. It was one of the most fertile biotopes known. The ancient forest was a paradise where life developed naturally, unlike the barren deserts that dominated other species. However, ironically, this paradise became the first battleground for great evolutionary struggles. Over time, the fertile soil became a site for large-scale natural experiments. Evolution, driven by the pursuit of new discoveries, gave birth to ever-new species here, viewing this world as a celestial testing ground. South America, once a spiritual haven for gigantic titanosaurs, also fell under the control of new predators. The indigenous inhabitants, proud sauropods, defenders of their land, fought to the last. The last of them, according to legends etched in stone, decided to die in battle, rather than live in perpetual fear, preferring to perish in a state of total terror. The Carcharodontosaurs, without regret, chose these lands as their second home. Soon, after an unspoken alliance between different groups of predators, the continent became yet another testing ground, where representatives of different species clashed and interbred in endless struggle. The first large population of hadrosaurs, Phrystidini c. Hadrosauridae, on this land was established in a region known as Area, where fertile soil offered new horizons for development. However, this peace was short-lived. Soon, the herbivores found themselves embroiled in a series of brutal territorial conflicts with other species. Observing this with grim satisfaction, the giant predators turned this region into an arena of endless conflict, where violence and fighting became commonplace. Over time, the hadrosaurs were driven out of Area onto a neighboring island archipelago, and their numbers began to decline. Years later, a new character appeared on the scene: Tyrannosaurus rex. Driven by evolution itself, he set out on a journey across the land bridge connecting Asia and North America, accompanied by death itself. During his journey, he discovered new hunting grounds that now bear the imprint of his footprints. But this was more than just exploration. It was an invasion. Another attempt to establish control over uncharted territory. In the heart of the continent, hidden from prying eyes, lay the gateway to the lands of the Anunnaki. Today, this region thrives, free of open conflict, and humans are occasionally granted the opportunity to enter as a reward for their faithful service to the Guardians. Those fortunate enough to settle here report that their bodies are rejuvenated and they live longer and healthier lives than they would in known lands, where the air is saturated with toxins polluted by the system they serve. One day, an old, scarred triceratops sat on the bank of a prehistoric river, watching the waves ebb and flow. His gaze wandered beyond the horizon. The water lapped at his feet, cool and calm, soothing him as he thought back to his homeland. Images flickered before his mind's eye, images of his kin, many of whom were already gone. Their lives were bound to the land he had left behind. He wondered if they considered him dead, lost to his mad pursuit of distant pastures. And yet, he had left them a legacy, his offspring. He wanted his herd to remember his true path, to know that he had not simply vanished. He felt the decades weighing down on him, like the heavy weight of old age that should have arrived long ago. Though still outwardly powerful, he felt the growing weariness and pain that signaled his time was rapidly drawing to an end. Watching the fading light, he quietly wondered, am I really going to die here, in this beautiful yet distant land? As the sun sank lower, painting the world in shades of red and gold, the old giant sank back onto the soft earth. His body shook with an unrelenting pain, as if 1,000 thorns were piercing his joints. He looked up at the sky, where the stars seemed like distant satellites. So many of them, he muttered under his breath, thinking of his kin. Gone into eternity, never knowing what true peace was. His voice faded into the gentle night breeze. The members of his herd around him thinned noticeably. Each was lost in thought about the danger they had brought beyond their native valleys. At that moment, another male approached the old leader and touched his flank with his horn. His eyes shone with understanding. "Hold on, old man," his gesture seemed to say, and there was a sense of confidence in this silent communication. Freedom from pain was already near. Despair hangs in the air like a suffocating fog. The glow of a new disaster, another all-consuming epidemic, is already looming on the horizon, meaning the grip of power will become even tighter. But before us unfolds a picture of silent resistance. Our kin, the descendants of those who once ruled these lands, are now day by day seeping back into familiar territory. They move like shadows, invisible in their own home. In this confrontation, their greatest strength would be used, their own weapons turned against their creators. Soon, the scales would fall from their eyes, they would see clearly and see the true state of affairs. But the moment the truth was revealed to them in all its horrific nakedness, it would be impossible to change anything. A chill of alarm ran down William's spine, but Butler continued speaking, and there was no trace of doubt in his voice, only steely certainty. They will see the truth. They will finally understand the full depth of the lie, the full scope of the control, and the poison they've been fed all these years. And then our time will come. We will reveal ourselves. The Anakim may guard their walls around the clock, but we will be ready. This time, failure is unacceptable. If the situation becomes critical, we will save as many souls as we can. His hand gripped William's shoulder tightly, and his gaze burned with a fierce, unbending determination. You must endure, my old friend. Your journey has been so long. Endure just a little longer, and you will see with your own eyes the freedom of our people. William nodded silently in response and handed Butler his notes, a diary he had meticulously kept since the day he left the shores of his native United States. His entire odyssey was captured on these pages. Breathtaking places, hidden landscapes, fleeting sparks of true happiness and love. "Let this be my last will," he whispered, "my message to those left behind." It was a cry of hope, addressed to all who hungered for truth. Suddenly, a shudder ran through his body, and a new wave of pain washed over him. He froze, staring into the endless blue sky. There, high above him, Silver blue ships, shimmering with metal, traced swift arcs across the sky. "Where does your path lie?" flashed through his fading consciousness as distant stars slowly blurred before his eyes. "Isn't it time to awaken them all? Are we ready for this?" And in that moment, a quiet but unshakable certainty was born in his heart. The message he carried within him was utterly simple, yet it pounded in his temples like an alarm bell. These lands are real. We are here. We are waiting for you. The real battle is within each of us. Resist, and freedom will surely come. We are here to lead you to the light. Let us travel to a world hidden from the eyes of most. Imagine lands lying behind impenetrable walls of ice, a land whose very existence would seem like fiction. It was here, in this lost world, that Helen Morris was born. Her father, William Morris, was a daring navigator who braved the ocean. The icy barriers that barred the path to unknown lands parted before him, revealing secrets the rest of humanity was destined to never even guess at. And now, Helen, his daughter, takes her step, ready to uncover the secrets for which her father gave his life. Secrets that could turn the world upside down. The truth about the existence of alien civilizations, about the lost history of humanity before the last Great Reset, and about the mysterious rulers, the Guardians, who have kept humanity in ignorance for centuries. At 9:15 a.m., we find Helen Morris in a small grey room where the silence seems palpable. This place is located within the enclosure, an area once teeming with human civilization, but now a pale shadow of its former glory. Helen has returned to the land of her ancestors, and the weight of history weighs heavily upon her. Her father, William, believed in the freedom of these lands until his last breath, and Helen was determined to see his work through. Life within these walls was harsh, but it was suffused with hope and faith in a better future. Yet everything here was under constant surveillance. Can this really be called life? She wondered. Vast masses of people had become puppets, their minds manipulated into believing a distorted version of history that had nothing to do with them. They had forgotten the sacrifices of their ancestors, like her father, who fought for the truth to come to light. Helen's father had died trying to expose the greatest crime against humanity. The name of this force is the Guardians. An invisible power, shadowy puppeteers who pull the strings of fate, manipulating entire nations and carefully erasing the true pages of human history. They established their own rules, dividing people by skin color, religious beliefs, and artificial borders. These strife gave rise to countless wars and brought unbearable suffering. The only thing worth fighting for is freedom, her father often said. And these words became a guiding light for Helen. The land itself was a harsh place, full of dangers, where survival required incredible effort. But Helen knew she couldn't remain indifferent. The Guardians, also known as the Watchers or the Corrupt Brotherhood, were a parasitic force that had influenced humanity since the dawn of its existence. Thanks to her father's writings and the teachings of Shekia, a giant who revealed to her hidden knowledge of the world, Helen learned much about their methods of control. This knowledge concerned other civilizations and the true history of Terra Infinita, the lands beyond the known world, beyond the icy walls. Helen knew there was no time to waste. For centuries, the Guardians had preyed on human weaknesses, provoking conflict, manipulating information, and sowing fear to maintain their power. Living in such a world seems normal, Helen noted bitterly, but this normality is built on a foundation of lies. She urged people to question everything they had been taught, to show compassion, and to strive for unity in order to resist the system that had lulled them into complacency. Returning to the lands her father had abandoned during the war, Helen was horrified to discover that nothing had changed. They were still controlled by the same custodians. Wars continued, but they were waged not for freedom, but merely to maintain division and control that benefited the oppressors. Her father's words echoed in her mind. True security cannot come from governments, leaders, or political parties. We ourselves must free ourselves from those who pull the strings and control us. And above all this diversity, above all these worlds, rises the Great Dome, a colossal and mysterious structure that crowns the entire known universe. Within its colossal boundaries lie 178 separate worlds, each known as a circular environment. Each of these worlds is utterly unique, with its own climate, its own civilization, and sometimes even its own small domes within the main one. The Great Dome is considered the final frontier of the known universe, and for centuries it has been the source of both awe and primal fear. Only a few have ever seen it up close, and all those who have attempted to cross it have suffered crushing defeat. Ancient legends and chronicles are filled with stories of daredevils, daring explorers who defied fate and attempted to reach the other side of the dome. But every expedition, every daring quest, ended the same way. They encountered an invisible yet utterly impenetrable barrier. Some even claim it can be touched, though no one can explain how. These endless attempts and failures have bred a crippling fear, especially among the civilizations that dominate these worlds. For them, the dome is not just a border, but a shield protecting their absolute power. The very thought that some outside force could breach this defense and disrupt their order unnerves them. Even within the dome itself, travel between worlds can be extremely difficult. Penetrating the smaller domes located within the main one is equally challenging. Over time, technologies have been developed to overcome these barriers, but air travel remains a near impossible task. The most reliable means of travel has always been by water, where natural passages occasionally open, connecting the inner and outer worlds like fleeting portals. These portals offered the opportunity to explore new worlds, but they also became a source of chaos. Many proved unstable, and countless travelers who risked passing through them vanished without a trace. Some speculate that these unfortunate souls were transported to unknown corners of the universe, while others believe they were simply destroyed during the transition. But despite all the risks, work on creating new portals continues. Between worlds exist independent territories that once served as refuge for early explorers during long journeys. These neutral zones are believed to connect different worlds, opening avenues for new discoveries and offering a chance for escape. Many believe the worlds beneath the Great Dome were created for exploration, to inspire a desire for freedom and ultimately lead seekers to the heavenly realms, filled with even greater mysteries that lie beyond. A vast dome looms over these worlds like a silent guardian, protecting them from external threats. This majestic barrier, like an ominous ghost, constantly reminds us of its boundaries and hidden potential. It holds secrets and challenges. Perhaps it is the path to freedom, but few are willing to pay the price to overcome it. The Guardians are a parasitic race driven by an insatiable thirst for conquest and exploitation. Their technology is focused solely on offense and defense, and their endless obsession with colonizing and exploiting the resources of other worlds and creatures has made them the dominant force within the Great Dome. The Guardians' origins remain a mystery, but some theories hold that they were created through a desperate genetic fusion between their race and another, perhaps one from beyond the dome itself. It is said that this union gave birth to the fearsome creatures we know today. They were among the first to transcend the confines of their homeworld, using advanced technology to expand their sphere of influence. They wandered from one circle to another, forever seeking new horizons to conquer. They were a ruthless race, suppressing any civilization they encountered for centuries. Their power seemed unrivaled, and their influence grew with each new expedition to the borders of known worlds. However, their dominance was not eternal. History records 2 crushing defeats suffered by the Guardians, each time by an entirely different race. These rare setbacks. But defeat did not break their will, did not dampen their thirst for revenge. We are speaking of the people of Sunstamu Kota. If alarming rumors are to be believed, their next invasion is only a matter of time. Ancient chronicles record them as the only race to dare encroach on the celestial lands, the mysterious, sacred cradle from which, according to legend, the human race itself originated. Legends claim that within every human being burns a primordial spark, a particle of vital energy inextricably linked to this mythical world. And this connection makes the coming clash between humans and their eternal enemies, the Guardians, absolutely inevitable. Although both the Guardians and humanity have already known the bitterness of war with the giants, an ominous premonition hangs in the air. History is about to take a new, bloody turn. No one can predict the future with absolute certainty, but all signs point to such a catastrophic scenario being more than likely. And the challenge of avoiding repeating the mistakes of the past is more pressing than ever. With each new reset initiated by the Guardians, their iron grip on the world's throat tightens ever more tightly. People's lives are becoming less and less free, increasingly subject to strict rules and regulations. Today's humanity is a pale shadow of its ancestors. Endless manipulation and total control have led to people losing their will and freedom with each new generation, turning into obedient puppets. Let's recall the times of the Great War. Then, humanity and the giants, casting aside their past rivalries, stood shoulder to shoulder against a common enemy, the Castadians. Their goal was to reclaim their stolen freedom and restore the truth about their glorious past. They succeeded in achieving the near impossible, dealing a crushing blow to the enemy, destroying the Castadians' supreme leader. But the price of this victory was monstrous. In response, the Castadians initiated a reset protocol, and thousands of human infants were scattered across various remote lands. Many of these children, less than 7 months old, grew up completely ignorant of their origins and history. From birth, their minds were influenced by Guardian technology, which shaped their consciousness and controlled every step of their development. Now, let us travel to another corner of this world to meet a force whose name is spoken in whispers. These are the Anunnaki, a race of conquerors whose might and technology inspire primal terror. Imagine these creatures, 5-meter-tall giants, their bodies covered in yellow-green scales. Their piercing eyes, glowing yellow, crimson, or pitch black, can paralyze the will of anyone who dares meet their gaze. Their very appearance is a weapon that sows panic. They are great architects, and on every conquered world they leave their mark, colossal pyramids, silent monuments to their boundless power and total control. Their technological arsenal is many steps ahead of anything known in the Great Dome. They possess sophisticated devices that allow them to alter the very fabric of their environment and easily subjugate entire civilizations. The Anunnaki wield weapons of unimaginable power and are capable of opening complex spatial portals for instantaneous travel between worlds. This ability allows them to invade foreign civilizations suddenly and devastatingly, leaving no chance for resistance. It is this technological superiority that makes them one of the most formidable races in the universe, perhaps even more dangerous than the Castadians themselves. The relationship between the Anunnaki and the Castadians is a tangled web of intrigue and betrayal. Both races are obsessed with power and see each other as arch-rivals. In one of the great conflicts of the past, the Anunnaki managed to gain the upper hand over the Castadians. However, to everyone's astonishment, instead of finishing off their enemy, they formed a strategic alliance with them. This alliance proved a death sentence for the hopes of humans and giants who dreamed of freedom. Their joint uprising was brutally suppressed. The Anunnaki's homelands are harsh and lifeless. They prefer to settle in arid, sun-baked regions where vegetation is almost non-existent. One of the most insidious traps in their territories are the so-called water mountains. From a distance, their surface appears mirror-like, beckoning with its serenity and coolness. But this is only an illusion. In reality, these waters are a teeming, deadly cauldron inhabited by gigantic, serpentine creatures. Some of these monsters, according to scout reports, reach over 55 meters in length. These leviathans transform rivers and lakes into an impenetrable barrier, reliably protecting the Anunnaki lands from intruders. But the Anunnaki are more than just conquerors. They are master manipulators who remake entire societies to suit their own purposes. Using myth, art, and entirely fabricated historical accounts, they erase the memory of their conquered people's true past. In ancient frescoes, they are often depicted with animal heads and humanoid bodies. In this way, they weave their image into the culture of the conquered worlds, so that their tyranny is perceived as natural, even divine. Despite their alliance, an icy tension always lingers between the Anunnaki and the Guardians. Both races strive for absolute control, and their fragile truce is based not on trust, but on temporary expediency. Today, they share the throne of supreme rulers in the Great Dome, but their hidden rivalry is a ticking time bomb, ready to explode at any moment. In contrast, the Venusians were a civilization of peace and contemplation. Their entire path was dedicated to spiritual growth. Their cities boasted no armories or impenetrable fortresses, which set them apart from other worlds. However, this very peacefulness made them easy prey for the Castadians, the brutal colonizers. Confident in their superiority, the Castadian legions arrived on Venus, anticipating a swift conquest. But no sooner had their boots touched the surface than they were met by a merciless storm that engulfed the entire planet. At first, the invaders dismissed it as a normal natural phenomenon, but the storm continued unabated. Days passed, then weeks, and it became clear. This was no mere weather. It was the Venusians' planetary defense system. They had secrets of their own. The entire people retreated deep underground into a network of high-tech bunkers equipped with systems that the Castadian mind could not comprehend. All attempts to storm the underground shelters ended in crushing failure. The Castadians employed powerful explosives, energy blockades, and other tactical maneuvers, but the Venusians seemed to anticipate their every move. Disillusionment and mounting losses sowed discord among the invaders, and their army began to crumble from within. As the death toll mounted, the Guardian leader was forced to request parley with a representative of Venus. The details of their conversation will forever remain a secret, but shortly after this meeting, the Guardians hastily abandoned the planet. Their invasion had ended in complete and humiliating failure. Venus retained its independence, its people remained safe in their underground cities, and the Guardians learned a harsh lesson. Never underestimate those you perceive as weaker than yourself. Our journey next takes us to the lands of the dragons, home to the Etemin race, renowned for their exceptional psychic abilities and technological genius. But before they reached their current heights of development, the Etemin survived a terrifying invasion by the Guardians. In those distant times, they used their intimate knowledge of their land and its extensive network of underground tunnels to fiercely resist the invaders. However, the Guardians' technological superiority was undeniable, and the Etemin were ultimately defeated. Despite their defeat, they did not surrender. Over time, the Etemin were able to rebuild their lands and transform them into a true hub of scientific innovation. They forged alliances with other races, including the Ceres of Arion, and greatly strengthened their defenses. And although peace now reigns in their lands, the Etemin never forget the bitter lessons of their past. The history of Mars is written in blood and ash. It was once a thriving world, teeming with life, where unity and spiritual growth were prized above all else. But everything changed when Anunnaki ships appeared on its crimson horizon. War began. The Martians fought with desperate courage, but when victory became apparent, the last survivors of their race made a terrible choice. They chose collective death over a life of slavery. In a final act of defiance and pride, they committed suicide, sending even the ruthless Anunnaki into a state of shock. Mars was depopulated, its great civilization was wiped from the face of the universe, and the Anunnaki turned the dead planet into their experimental laboratory. Today, it is a zone of perpetual conflict, where the remnants of various races, including a small human colony, survive under the watchful eye of the Guardians and the Anunnaki. The fate of the Neptunians was different. Their world was harsh, perpetual sandstorms, meager resources, but they managed to adapt and built magnificent cities on the few fertile coastlines. When the Anunnaki arrived on their planet, they appeared disguised as friends and allies, but the Neptunians were not so naive. The invaders offered them advanced technology in exchange for full cooperation, but it was only a trap. Soon they were betrayed, deprived of their freedom, and all the resources of their world were plundered. At first, the Neptunians accepted defeat, but then the fire of rebellion ignited in their hearts. They turned their moon Triton into a center of bloody resistance. Eventually, exhausted by endless guerrilla warfare, the Anunnaki were forced to retreat, leaving Neptune free but deeply scarred. The Uranites, a race of giants with incredibly keen eyesight, inhabited the icy wastes of Uranus. For a long time, they held no interest for the Guardians. But everything changed the day colossal deposits of valuable minerals were discovered beneath the permafrost of their lands. The Guardians immediately launched a brutal military campaign, enslaving the Uranites and turning their planet into a gigantic quarry. Now, the surface of their world is pitted with enormous craters from the relentless mining. The inhabitants of the central region, known as Titania, now wage a desperate struggle for survival. Their civilization has become a ghost of its former glory. The Jupiterian lands are striking in their scale and diversity. They encompass numerous territories, each with its own unique culture and rich history. The past of these peoples is imbued with distinctiveness, but alas, it is marred by endless wars and conflicts, skillfully orchestrated by the Anunnaki. Long ago, when the Anunnaki first invaded Jupiter, they did not rely on brute force. Instead, they sowed seeds of discord and mistrust among the local tribes, allowing them to easily establish their dominance. This diabolical divide-and-conquer strategy led to a virtually constant civil war between the various factions. At the very center of the Jovian world lies Zeus's land, the source of absolute power. The Zeus-born, along with another dominant group known as the Europeans, rule the rest with an iron fist. They skillfully manipulate other territories, such as Ganymede, Callisto, and Amalthea, pitting them against each other in endless conflicts. This leaves them too weak and disunited to challenge the central authority. And, on Metis, in closed and secret zones, reside only the Anunnaki themselves and their closest allies. It is here, in the depths of secret laboratories, that the most devastating weapons are developed, cementing their absolute power. Let's travel to worlds where the Anunnaki's dominion is still felt. Wherever you look, their legacy is evident. Colossal pyramids, piercing the heavens, stand as silent, eternal witnesses to their former might. And though eons have passed, the Earth itself seems to still remember the pain. Its landscape is pockmarked with the scars left by conquerors in time immemorial. Here before us is Chonda, the lands that lie adjacent to the Pegasus system. Here, in the very air, the bitterness of tragedy and the timid light of hope mingle. Even now, after so much time, the ominous shadow of the Anunnaki looms over these worlds, and the battle for the right to freedom never ceases. Long ago, these skies belonged to the Lanteans, a wondrous race of winged beings. Their backs were adorned not with feathers, but with wings of living, iridescent metal. They were a people of thinkers and creators, not warriors. Instead of forging swords, they dedicated themselves to science and understanding the universe, and it was precisely this desire for peace, this nobility, that ultimately became their Achilles' heel when the Castadians set foot on their home planet, Sulansda. The Lanteans, in their naivety, welcomed them as guests. They revealed their secrets, shared their technology, believing in the possibility of a peaceful coexistence. But the Guardians saw them as mere resources. They betrayed the Lanteans' trust, stole their knowledge, turning their greatest achievements against their creators. When the epiphany finally dawned, it was too late. Realizing their betrayal, the Lanteans rose in rebellion. Their wrath was terrible, their battle desperate, but this rebellion died in blood, devolving into a merciless slaughter. The fate of this people remains shrouded in mystery. Some chronicles claim the Lanteans were exterminated to the last. Others whisper that a handful of survivors managed to escape, and their images formed the basis of legends of celestial angelic beings who, to this day, inspire hope in the hearts of the enslaved. Now our journey continues to Aldebaran, to a world called Stoindara. Here dwell the Tarians, the living embodiment of strength and unyielding will. These mighty creatures, as if straight from the pages of ancient Minotaur myths, once terrorized the galaxy. They carried a dark reputation as cruel predators who had no qualms about human flesh. But time has changed them. The Taurians have undergone an incredible internal transformation, turning from monsters into noble protectors. Today, they extend a helping hand to other races, saving them from total annihilation. This defiance, their open defiance of the Guardians, made the Taurians sworn enemies of the parasitic rulers of the Great Dome. Yet, at the same time, their compassion and willingness to defend life have earned them staunch allies among oppressed peoples. The strength of the Taurians is truly colossal. An interesting detail of their culture. In their youth, they often have their horns trimmed, a ritual symbolizing their transition to adulthood. Their own history is a bloody chronicle of civil wars, particularly on Aldebaran. So much blood was spilled there that one battlefield was left forever untouched, a memorial to the fallen. Today, the Taurians have spread across many worlds. Their spiritual growth and technological progress have become a guiding light, a beacon of hope for all who have not resigned themselves to tyranny. We see a completely different picture in the worlds of the Saturnians. These people never knew the yoke of submission. Imagine colossi up to 14 meters tall, possessing incredible mental powers and technology that is eons ahead of its time. When the Anunnaki arrived on their lands with fire and sword, they quickly encountered an overwhelming force. The attempt at conquest failed miserably. Realizing that force would achieve nothing here, the Anunnaki changed tactics. They offered the Saturnians a partnership, seeing them as equals in scientific research and technological breakthroughs. But here too, they were disappointed. The Saturnians, whose people live without hierarchy and make all decisions collectively, rejected the Anunnaki's plans, especially their obsession with breaking through to the so-called heavenly lands. This people is known for its absolute peace and harmony. All their actions are subordinated to a collective will, which directs the development of their civilization. Their presence, like that of the Anakim giants, left an indelible mark on the history of the known lands, though the Guardians did everything they could to transform these memories into myths. Together, these two races represent a force capable of repelling both the Guardians and the Anunnaki themselves. Meanwhile, the Greys, a race that has achieved incredible heights in science and psychic abilities, reign supreme in the lands of Orion. These diminutive creatures have become a key tool in the hands of the Guardians, their primary weapon in their attempts to conquer the heavenly lands. However, their methods have earned them the most infamous reputation. Endless experiments on other races, primarily humans, have earned them a reputation as ruthless vivisectionists. The Greys' complete lack of empathy is confirmed by countless chilling stories of abductions and genetic experiments. But despite all their technology, the Greys have not always emerged victorious. During the time of Tartaria, they launched a massive attempt to seize control of the known lands, but were crushed by a combined army of giants and humans. Their leader fell in that battle, and this defeat only fueled their fierce hatred for humanity. Although they managed to establish colonies on independent territories, they were never able to completely subjugate these worlds. Against this backdrop, the Pleiadians appear as a ray of light in a dark realm. These towering, almost ethereal beings are renowned for their spiritual depth and sincere desire to bring goodness to the world. Their distant ancestors found refuge on the Pleiades after losing the great battle for Asgard. They were peaceful by nature, but their early deal with the Anunnaki proved fatal. They were constantly manipulated, repeatedly leading to horrific catastrophes on their home planet. The Pleiadians occasionally visited known Earths, but they always found it difficult to find common ground with humans. Ultimately, they chose a path of isolation to preserve their unique culture and spiritual values. The Clonelands, however, are a grim monument to scientific arrogance and failed experiments. Originally conceived as a gigantic laboratory, they became the site of countless experiments, most of which ended in disaster. It was here that the Anunnaki perfected cloning technology. But one day, the experiment spiraled out of control. The clones broke free, sowing death and destruction. Afterward, the land was hastily abandoned. Today, it is a dead, ominous desert, where intact laboratories still stand amidst the ruins, silent ghosts of a tragic past. Far from everyone, in their own isolated worlds, live the reptilians, or Lazards. Their civilization prefers to hide in gigantic underground cities, maintaining maximum distance from other peoples. They are known for their advanced technology and incredible military might, which allows them to thwart any attempts at enslavement. From time to time, they make contact with the Castadians, but their true allegiance is unknown. Some analysts believe they may side with the Guardians in the coming wars, but their true goals remain a deep mystery, and their actions are completely unpredictable. And above all, this rises the Heavenly Lands, a great mystery, a territory untouched by the parasitic races that have defiled countless worlds with their presence. It is said that these hidden lands hold secrets waiting to be revealed. Neither the Guardians nor the Anunnaki, despite their desperate attempts, have ever succeeded in penetrating them and seizing the secrets that are inextricably linked to the very essence of humanity. These mysteries remain protected by an invisible force, inaccessible to any invader. Beyond these lands lie countless other worlds, each with its own fate and history. Some thrive in peace and tranquility, untouched by the oppression of parasitic races. Perhaps they simply hold no interest for the conquerors. Other worlds, however, are far less fortunate. Parasitic races invade young, developing civilizations, plundering them, taking planets and resources, rewriting their histories, and leaving behind only scorched earth and shattered dreams. Humanity, too, felt the full brunt of this predatory exploitation. And while it wasn't physically destroyed, its spirit suffered a terrible blow. Its true potential was artificially suppressed. The colonizers' true goals were far deeper than mere conquest. They sought to sever humanity's connection to what is commonly called the source of life. This connection is believed to be a unique phenomenon, unparalleled by other races. It is this connection that connects humans to the celestial lands and sets them apart from all others. The colonizers were never able to control or subjugate this source. Despite all their might, they proved powerless against this inner truth, and this powerlessness bred fear in them for centuries, for the very existence of such a connection threatened their total dominance. Physical shackles may be as strong as they seem, but the spirit cannot be broken. Throughout the Great Dome, there are peoples who have managed to repel the parasitic forces. They endured, adapted, and in some cases, even prevailed. Their example serves as a reminder to humanity. Survival is possible, and hope endures even in the face of seemingly insurmountable threats. The Skylands are a symbol of this hope. Untouched, unblemished, they embody the purity of spirit and the eternal desire for freedom. They are living proof that it is possible to resist and be reborn. The fact that the parasitic races, despite all their technology and power, were never able to set foot on these lands only underscores their colossal significance. Perhaps here lies the key to understanding what humanity has lost and what it can yet regain. Perhaps here lies a path to freedom that has not yet been erased from the memory of the universe. And though the heavenly lands are still unreachable, their very existence reminds us of the power that lies dormant within each of us. This power cannot be taken away, it can only be awakened. there, beyond the worlds we know, many more stories exist. Perhaps some were fortunate enough to be born into a world that was developing unhindered. Perhaps the colonizers simply saw nothing of value in it. Or perhaps it arose too late to attract their rapacious attention. But not everyone was so fortunate. Many worlds fell victim to the aggressors, never having had the chance to realize their potential. Their peoples were slaughtered, their histories rewritten, and their dreams trampled. The invaders swept everything clean, leaving behind only pain and emptiness, and humanity could not escape this tragic fate. Once upon a time, its place in this world was entirely different.